The wind off the Montana plains didn't care about your plans. It tore through wool coats like they were made of newspaper, turned your breath to ice crystals before you could swallow, and reminded you, every goddamn second, that nature wasn't interested in your survival. Eleanor Vane learned that lesson the moment she stepped off the Northern Pacific Railway into Black Hollow on November 12, 1882, with a carpet bag that weighed less than her shame and a future that looked about as promising as a three-legged horse. The station platform was nothing more than weathered planks and a roof that leaked. No one waited for her. No one had sent a telegram explaining the delay. The station master, a gray-haired man with tobacco-stained whiskers and eyes that had seen too many desperate women arrive on that same train, didn't even bother asking if someone was coming. He just pointed toward the town with his chin and went back to sorting mail that probably contained more broken promises. Eleanor stood there for 20 minutes before accepting the truth she'd been running from since St. Louis. Marcus Hendry didn't exist, or if he did, he'd never had any intention of marrying her. The letters, 3 months' worth of carefully written correspondence about Montana's opportunities, about a gentleman rancher seeking an educated woman to help manage his growing enterprise, about a proper courtship leading to a respectable marriage, had been nothing but bait, and she'd bitten down hard. She had 11 cents left. The rest of her money had gone to the train ticket, to the modest traveling dress she'd bought to make a good first impression, to the small pearl earrings she'd pawned and rebought 3 times during the journey west, each time swearing they'd bring her luck. They hadn't. "You waiting for Marcus Hendry?" The station master's voice cut through her thoughts. Eleanor turned. "You know him?" "Know of him." The man spat tobacco juice into a dented coffee tin. "So do about 15 other women who've come through here in the past 2 years. He doesn't exist, miss. It's a scheme. They print fake advertisements back east, collect correspondence fees, get women to buy tickets west. By the time you arrive, you're broke and stuck." The information hit her like a slap, even though she'd already suspected as much. Hearing it confirmed out loud made it real, made her situation impossible to ignore. "Is there a sheriff?" she asked. "Sure, you want to report it?" "I want to know if he'd care." The station master laughed, a dry, bitter sound. "Sheriff Talbot's got his hands full with land disputes and cattle rustling. He's not going to chase after some phantom marriage broker, if that's what you're asking. My advice? Find work in town if you can, or get back on that train before winter really hits." Eleanor looked down at her coins. Not enough for a meal. Definitely not enough for a return ticket to anywhere that mattered. And even if she could scrape together the fare, where would she go? Back to Philadelphia, where her brother's wife had made it clear she wasn't welcome after the scandal? Back to the boarding house where the other women whispered about her broken engagement to a married man, a fact she'd only discovered after he'd taken her savings to invest in a business opportunity that never materialized? No. There was nothing back east except more shame, more closed doors, more polite voices telling her that a woman of questionable reputation had better options elsewhere. "Work," Eleanor said. "What kind?" "Can you cook?" "Adequately." "So?" "Well enough to mend." "Clean?" "I'm not afraid of work." She met his eyes. "But I'm not built for domestic service. I kept books for my father's law practice for 6 years. I can read contracts, manage accounts, track inventory. I'm better with numbers than most men who claim the title of bookkeeper." The station master studied her for a long moment. Something shifted in his expression, not quite respect, but at least a flicker of interest. "You're serious?" "Dead serious. There's a rancher about 5 miles north, Silas Mercer, former Pinkerton detective, came out here to raise cattle and stay away from people. He's been looking for someone to make sense of his books ever since his last man disappeared 3 months back. Rode into town one morning, withdrew his pay, and nobody's seen him since." "Disappeared how? Dead?" "Maybe. Or maybe just smart enough to leave. Mercer's got problems, the kind that get people hurt. There's a land fight brewing, and he's right in the middle of it." Eleanor felt something tighten in her chest. Not fear, something sharper. "What kind of problems?" "The kind involving Gideon Whitlock." The station master's voice dropped. "You been out west before?" "No." "Then you don't know how it works. Men like Whitlock, they're not just rich. They're connected. They own railroads, mining operations, lumber contracts. And when they want land, they take it. Doesn't matter who's living on it or who's got legal title. They forge documents, bribe surveyors, intimidate witnesses. By the time you realize what's happening, you've lost everything. And Mercer's fighting back? Trying to. He's got deeds, surveys, records, but they're a mess. His father started the ranch 20 years ago, and the paperwork's been handed down through 3 different owners. Mercer thinks if he can organize it, prove chain of title, he can stop Whitlock in court. But he's a cattleman, not a lawyer. He needs someone who can read legal documents, track down discrepancies, build a case. Eleanor looked toward the north, where gray clouds hung low over distant hills. 5 miles. In this cold, that was a brutal walk. But what choice did she have? If I go out there, she said carefully, and he hires me, where would I stay? There's a bunkhouse. It's rough, but it's warm. Mercer's not the type to take advantage, if that's your worry. He's cold, doesn't talk much, doesn't trust easy. But he's not a predator. That's a ringing endorsement. The station master shrugged. It's the truth. You want me to send word you're coming? Eleanor looked down at her carpet bag. Everything she owned in the world fit inside. 2 dresses, a spare pair of shoes, undergarments, a hairbrush, the letters from Marcus Hendry she should have burned but couldn't quite let go of. Not much to show for 28 years of life. No, she said. I'll walk. The road north was little more than frozen ruts cutting through scrub grass and rocky soil. Eleanor's feet went numb within the first mile. Her hands, even stuffed into her coat pockets, ached from the cold. She kept moving because stopping meant freezing, and freezing meant dying, and she'd be damned if she'd come this far just to collapse in a Montana ditch. She thought about her father while she walked. He'd been a good lawyer, respected, careful, honest to a fault. He'd taught her to read contracts when she was 12, showed her how to track billing, explained the difference between precedent and statute. He'd never understood why his colleagues looked at her like she was an oddity, some strange creature who'd wandered into a profession reserved for men. He'd just believed she was smart. That had been enough. He died when she was 23, 5 years ago, but it still felt recent. Her brother inherited the practice and promptly hired a male clerk to replace her. Her sister-in-law suggested she focus on finding a husband, and when Eleanor made the mistake of trusting the wrong man, a charming attorney with kind eyes and a wife he'd conveniently failed to mention, the gossip spread fast enough to ruin any chance she had of respectable employment in Philadelphia. So yes, Montana, a fake marriage scheme, 11 cents, a 5-mile walk through freezing wind to beg for work from a stranger who probably wouldn't hire her anyway. It was almost funny. The Mercer Ranch appeared just as the afternoon light started to fade, a collection of rough buildings huddled against the base of a low ridge. The main house was 2 stories built from logs and fieldstone, with a chimney trailing thin smoke. Nearby stood a barn, a stable, a bunkhouse, and several smaller structures she couldn't identify. Cattle grazed in a fenced pasture to the east, dark shapes against the snow. A man stood near the barn, watching her approach. Tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a heavy coat and a wide-brimmed hat that shadowed his face. He didn't move as she walked up the long drive, didn't call out a greeting, just waited. Eleanor stopped about 10 feet away. I'm looking for Silas Mercer. You found him. His voice was low, rough-edged, not unfriendly, but not warm either. You lost? No, the station master in Black Hollow said you needed a bookkeeper. Mercer's expression didn't change. He did he? I can read legal documents, manage ledgers, track contracts, and land records. I worked for a law practice in Philadelphia for 6 years. I'm not looking for charity. I'm looking for work. You came all the way from Philadelphia for bookkeeping work in Montana? I came here for other reasons. Those reasons didn't work out. Now I need employment. He studied her for a long moment. She could feel him taking her measure, the worn dress, the thin coat, the way she held herself despite the cold. What's your name? Eleanor Vane. You know anything about ranching? No. Cattle? Nothing beyond what I've read. Land law? More than most people. Mercer shifted his weight. The job's not simple bookkeeping. I need someone who can dig through 20 years of property records, surveys, deeds, contracts, most of it poorly organized or outright missing. I need someone who can find discrepancies, track down forged documents, build a timeline of land transfers, and I need it done fast. Why fast? Because there's a syndicate trying to take my land and every other ranch in this valley. They've got lawyers, money, and no conscience. If I can't prove legal ownership before they file their claim in district court, I'll lose everything. Eleanor felt that familiar tightness in her chest again. The same feeling she'd had when her father explained a particularly complex case, when she'd spotted an error in a contract that everyone else had missed. The feeling of a problem that needed solving. "How much are you offering?" she asked. "Room, board, and $30 a month." It wasn't much, but it was more than 11 cents. "When do I start?" Mercer's mouth twitched, not quite a smile, but close. "Now, if you're able. Office is in the main house. Records are a disaster. You'll earn your pay." He turned and started walking toward the house without waiting to see if she'd follow. Eleanor picked up her carpet bag and went after him. Shake. The office was exactly as advertised. A disaster. Papers covered every surface. The desk, the chairs, the floor, stacked in corners and stuffed into crates. Ledgers lay open with pages torn out. Survey maps hung crooked on the walls, their edges curling. File boxes overflowed with documents that looked like they'd been organized by throwing them randomly in the general direction of storage. "This," Mercer said, gesturing broadly, "is everything related to the ranch's ownership going back to 1862. Deeds, surveys, tax records, grazing contracts, water rights. My father started buying land when Montana was still a territory. He kept records, but not well. After he died, the ranch passed through 2 other owners before I bought it 5 years ago. Each one added to the mess." Eleanor set down her bag and walked slowly around the room, scanning the chaos. "What's the specific threat you're facing?" "Gideon Whitlock. He owns the Western Montana Land and Development Company. On paper, they're a legitimate business buying property for railroad expansion. In reality, they're land pirates. They target ranchers, find weaknesses in property titles, forge documents to create competing claims, then drag you into court until you can't afford to fight anymore. Once you're broke, they offer to buy you out for pennies on the dollar." "And if you refuse?" Mercer's jaw tightened. "Accidents happen. Fences get cut. Cattle disappear. Buildings catch fire. Eventually you sell or you leave in a box." "What's your vulnerability?" "My father's original survey. It was done by a territorial surveyor named Clayton Ross back in 1863. Ross was drunk half the time and careless the other half. The survey markers don't match the deed description, and the county plat shows boundaries that are off by as much as half a mile in some places. Whitlock's lawyers are arguing that my deeds are invalid because they reference a faulty survey. They've filed a claim saying the land was never properly transferred from territorial ownership, which means it reverted to federal control, which means they can file for acquisition." Eleanor felt her mind start to work through the problem. "Do you have the original survey?" "I have a copy. The original's supposed to be in the county records office, but it's missing." "Missing as in lost, or missing as in stolen?" "Your guess is as good as mine." "What about Ross? Is he still alive?" "Died in 1875. "Other witnesses? Anyone who was present during the original survey?" "All dead or scattered. This was 20 years ago. People moved on, died, disappeared." Eleanor picked up one of the ledgers and flipped through it. The handwriting changed every few pages, suggesting multiple people had worked on it over the years. Numbers didn't add up. Dates were out of sequence. It was a mess. But it was a mess she understood. "You said your last bookkeeper disappeared," she said. "Why?" Mercer leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. "Don't know for certain, but the morning he left, he came into town and withdrew his entire salary from the bank. Told the clerk he was headed east. Never said goodbye. Never gave notice. Just gone." "You think someone paid him off?" "I think he saw which way the wind was blowing and decided to get out before the storm hit." Eleanor set down the ledger. "I need to understand something before I agree to this. If I take this job, am I putting myself in danger?" Mercer met her eyes. He didn't answer immediately, and she respected him for that. He was thinking, weighing the truth against the need to hire her. "Honestly," he said finally, "I don't know. Whitlock's people haven't targeted employees directly, just property and livestock. But I can't promise you'll be safe. If they realize you're building a case against them, they might try to scare you off." "Have they tried to scare you off?" "Several times. And you're still here. It's my land. I'm not leaving. Eleanor looked around the office again. 20 years of records, a missing survey, forged documents, a land baron with money and connections, a former Pinkerton detective too stubborn to back down. And her, a woman with a ruined reputation, no money, no options, and a skill set that might actually matter for once in her life. It was a terrible idea. She should walk away, find safer work in town, stay invisible. But she'd spent 5 years being invisible. 5 years apologizing for existing. 5 years living small because the alternative was too risky. Fuck that. I'll take the job, she said, but I have conditions. Mercer raised an eyebrow. You're in no position to make demands. Neither are you. If you had better options, you would have hired someone already. So here's what I need. Access to everything. Every document, every record, every piece of correspondence related to this ranch's ownership. If something's locked away or hidden, I need to see it. Second, if I find evidence of fraud or forgery, I need your word that you'll act on it, even if it implicates people you know or trust. Third, if this gets dangerous, I want a weapon and the training to use it. Mercer stared at her. You serious about that last one? Completely. A slow smile spread across his face, the first real expression she'd seen from him. All right, Miss Vane, you've got yourself a deal. He pushed off from the doorframe and extended his hand. Eleanor shook it. His grip was firm, calloused, the handshake of a man used to hard work. One more thing, she said. The previous bookkeeper, what was his name? Thomas Birch. Why? Because if someone paid him off, there'll be a record. And if there's a record, I'll find it. Isik. Eleanor spent the first 3 days doing nothing but sorting. She divided the papers into rough categories: deeds and titles, surveys and plats, tax records, contracts, correspondence, financial ledgers, and miscellaneous. Within each category, she organized chronologically. It was tedious, mind-numbing work that left her hands covered in dust and her back aching from bending over stacks of paper. But it was necessary. You couldn't find discrepancies until you understood the baseline. You couldn't spot forgeries until you knew what the authentic documents looked like. You couldn't build a case until you had all the pieces laid out in front of you. Mercer left her alone for the most part. He'd check in once a day, ask if she needed anything, then disappear to handle ranch work. She appreciated that. Some men would have hovered, second-guessed her methods, demanded constant updates. Mercer understood that this kind of work took time. She stayed in the bunkhouse, which was exactly as rough as advertised. A single room with 6 beds, a wood stove, and walls so thin she could hear the wind howling outside. She was the only one sleeping there. The ranch hands stayed in a separate building closer to the barn. That was fine. She'd spent enough time in boarding houses surrounded by other women's whispered judgments. The solitude felt like freedom. On the 4th day, she found the first discrepancy. It was small, easy to miss if you weren't paying attention. A deed transfer dated April 15, 1868, selling 640 acres from John Mercer, Silas's father, to a man named Robert Hayes. The price listed was $800, reasonable for the time and location. But when Eleanor cross-referenced it with the tax records, she found something odd. The property taxes for that same 640 acres were still being paid by John Mercer through 1870, 2 years after the supposed sale. She dug deeper, found the original deed from 1863, when John Mercer first acquired the land from the territorial government, found a survey map from 1867 showing the boundaries, found correspondence between Mercer and the county assessor disputing a tax increase in 1869. But she couldn't find any record of Robert Hayes taking possession. No tax payments under his name, no subsequent sales, no probate records if he'd died. Nothing. It was as if the deed transfer had been created but never executed. Eleanor sat back in her chair, thinking. A fake deed transfer. Why? Who benefited? She pulled out the financial ledgers and started tracking payments. There, a withdrawal of $800 in April 1868, listed as land sale proceeds, but the money had been deposited back into the ranch account 3 months later with a notation, refund, Hayes transaction void. So the sale had been canceled, but the deed still existed. Eleanor felt a cold certainty settle over her. This wasn't an accident. Someone had created a paper trail showing the land had been sold, then made sure the sale never completed. If Hayes's deed ever surfaced years later, it could be used to challenge the current ownership. A time bomb buried in the records. She needed to find out who Robert Hayes was. Mercer listened without interrupting while Eleanor explained what she'd found. They were in the ranch house kitchen, a large, warm space that smelled like coffee and wood smoke. He'd poured them both cups while she laid out the documents on the table. "Hayes," he said finally. "I've never heard that name." "Neither have I. That's the problem. There's no record of him in any other context, no property ownership, no business dealings, no census records. He's a ghost. Or a fake name." "Exactly." Eleanor tapped the deed. "Someone created a transaction that looked legitimate on paper, but was designed to fail. The question is why? To create a competing claim later." Mercer's voice was flat. "If Whitlock's lawyers can produce Hayes's deed and argue that the land was legally sold but never properly transferred back, they can cloud the title. Which is exactly what they're doing with the survey issue. They're not trying to win outright. They're creating enough legal confusion to make your ownership questionable. Then they drag you through court until you can't afford to fight." Mercer stood and walked to the window, looking out at the snow-covered pastures. "My father wasn't careless. If he voided that transaction, he would have destroyed the deed. Unless he didn't know it existed, what if Hayes, or whoever was using that name, forged his signature? Then we need to prove it." Eleanor gathered the papers. "I need access to other documents with your father's signature, anything authentic we can use for comparison. There's a trunk in the attic. Personal papers, letters, the original ranch charter. I'll bring it down. There's something else." Eleanor hesitated. "Your previous bookkeeper, Thomas Birch, when did he start working here?" "About 8 months before he disappeared. Why?" "Because this deed is dated 1868, but someone would need access to the ranch records to know it existed. If Birch was feeding information to Whitlock's people, this is exactly the kind of detail they'd want." Mercer turned from the window. His expression had gone cold. "You think Birch was a plant?" "I think it's possible. The timing fits. He shows up, works long enough to gain access to everything, then disappears right before the legal fight starts heating up." "Son of a bitch." Mercer's hands clenched into fists. "I vouched for him. He came with references, experience, seemed competent. References can be forged, and if you're running a scheme this elaborate, you make sure your people look legitimate." Mercer grabbed his coat from a hook by the door. "I'm riding into town. I want to check something." "What?" "The bank. Birch withdrew his pay before he left. If someone else made a large withdrawal around the same time, it might tell us who paid him off." Eleanor stood. "Can I come?" Mercer paused. "It's a hard ride in this weather." "I've handled worse." That wasn't entirely true, but she wasn't about to be left behind. Not now. Not when they were finally getting somewhere. Mercer studied her for a moment, then nodded. "Get your coat." The ride into Black Hollow took 2 hours. The cold was brutal. Wind cutting through every layer of clothing, turning Eleanor's face numb and her fingers stiff even inside gloves. But she gritted her teeth and kept pace with Mercer, refusing to slow down or complain. The town was small, barely more than a single street lined with wooden buildings. A general store, a saloon, a hotel, a church, the sheriff's office, and the bank. Mercer tied their horses outside the bank and led Eleanor inside. The banker was a nervous man named Otis Crenshaw, thin and balding, with ink-stained fingers and a perpetual frown. He looked up from his ledger when they entered, and his frown deepened. "Mr. Mercer, Miss, what can I do for you?" "I need to see the withdrawal records from 3 months ago," Mercer said. "Specifically, any large transactions around November 10th. Crenshaw's frown became a scowl. "That's confidential information." "Otis, don't start. You know what's happening with the land fights. I'm trying to find out if someone bribed my bookkeeper." "Even so, I can't just—" Mercer leaned on the counter. "Thomas Birch withdrew his pay on November 10th. You remember that?" Yes. "Was anyone else in here that day making unusual transactions?" Crenshaw glanced toward Eleanor, then back to Mercer. He was sweating despite the cold. "Mr. Mercer, I really shouldn't—" "Otis," Mercer's voice dropped. "If Whitlock's people are paying off employees to sabotage ranches, the whole valley needs to know. This isn't just about me." The banker's resistance crumbled. He disappeared into a back room and returned with a ledger, flipped through pages, found the date, ran his finger down the entries. There, he said quietly, November 10th. Thomas Birch withdrew $47, his accumulated wages. And, he hesitated. And? Mercer prompted. And 30 minutes later, a man named Samuel Garrett withdrew $200 and deposited it into an account under the name Hayes Properties. Eleanor felt her heart kick into a higher gear. Hayes? As in Robert Hayes? Hayes? Crenshaw looked miserable. I don't know. The account was opened 6 months ago by a man claiming to represent a land investment company. He made regular deposits, small amounts, nothing suspicious. Then this large withdrawal. Who's Samuel Garrett? Eleanor asked. Works for the Western Montana Land and Development Company. He's one of Whitlock's agents. Mercer and Eleanor exchanged looks. Can I see that account's full transaction history? Eleanor asked. Crenshaw hesitated again, but Mercer's expression left no room for argument. The banker pulled out another ledger and showed them the records. Eleanor scanned the entries. Regular deposits, all in amounts under $50. Then the $200 withdrawal on November 10th. Then nothing. This account, she said slowly, it's a front. They've been building it to look legitimate so they could make a large payment without raising suspicion. The withdrawal happens the same day Birch leaves town. That's not coincidence. Can you testify to this? Mercer asked Crenshaw. The banker went pale. Testify in court against Whitlock? If it comes to that. Mr. Mercer, I have a family. Whitlock's people don't forget. Eleanor felt a surge of anger. So you'll just let them steal land from honest ranchers because you're afraid? Crenshaw's face flushed. You don't understand what it's like out here, miss. Whitlock owns half the town. The judge, the sheriff, half the business owners. They're all in his pocket one way or another. Standing against him is suicide. Then the system's rotten, Eleanor said flatly. And unless people start standing up, it'll stay rotten. Mercer put a hand on her arm, a gentle warning to back off. Otis, I'm not asking you to decide now, but I want you to think about it, and in the meantime, I need copies of these transactions. Crenshaw looked like he wanted to refuse, but he was already in too deep. He made copies in shaking handwriting and handed them over. Outside, the cold hit like a slap after the bank's warmth. Eleanor stood on the wooden sidewalk, trying to calm the rage burning in her chest. He's right, you know, Mercer said quietly. Whitlock does own this town. Anyone who stands against him takes a real risk. That doesn't make it acceptable. No, but it makes it reality. Eleanor turned to face him. So what do we do? We have evidence Birch was paid off, evidence of a fake land company, evidence linking it all back to Whitlock's organization. That's not nothing. It's not enough, not yet. We need the original survey, we need to prove the Hayes deed is forged, and we need enough documentation to show a pattern of fraud. Right now, all we have is circumstantial evidence that would get torn apart in court. Then we find more. Mercer studied her. You're not afraid, are you? I'm terrified, Eleanor admitted. But I'm also angry. And anger's a better fuel than fear. Something shifted in Mercer's expression. Respect, maybe, or recognition. Come on. There's someone else we need to talk to. The someone else turned out to be a woman named Ruth Calloway, who lived in a small house on the edge of town. She was in her 60s with gray hair pulled back in a severe bun and eyes that missed nothing. When she opened her door and saw Mercer, her face lit up. Silas Mercer, you stubborn bastard! I heard you were fighting Whitlock. Come in before you freeze. The house was cramped but clean, smelling of herbs and bread. Ruth poured them coffee and settled into a rocking chair by the fire. This is Eleanor Vane, Mercer said. She's helping me organize the ranch records. Ruth's sharp eyes fixed on Eleanor. You the one who replaced Birch? I am. Good. That man was a weasel. I told Silas not to trust him, but men never listen. Mercer smiled slightly. Ruth used to work for the county assessor's office. She knows more about land records in this region than anyone alive. Damn right I do. Spent 30 years filing deeds, surveys, tax rolls. Saw every scheme, every fraud, every boundary dispute from here to Helena. What do you need? Eleanor leaned forward. We're trying to track down the original survey for the Mercer Ranch. The county records show it should be in the archives, but it's missing. Ruth's expression darkened. Missing. That's one word for it. You know what happened to it? I know Clayton Ross did the survey in 1863, drunk as a lord and half-blind from cataracts. I know it was filed properly because I filed it myself. And I know it disappeared from the archives about 2 years ago, right around the time Whitlock's people started sniffing around the valley. Stolen, Mercer said. Almost certainly, but there's something else you should know. Ruth stood and went to a cabinet, pulled out a wooden box, and brought it back to the table. Inside were papers, notebooks, personal correspondence. When I retired, I kept copies of certain documents, things I thought might be important, things I suspected might disappear. She pulled out a folded survey map and spread it on the table. Eleanor's breath caught. It was the original Mercer survey, or a copy of it, dated 1863, signed by Clayton Ross, showing boundary markers and township coordinates. You kept this? Mercer's voice was rough with emotion. I kept copies of 50 surveys I thought were vulnerable. Yours was one of them. Ross was sloppy, but he wasn't dishonest. His markers might be off by a few degrees, but the general boundaries are solid. Anyone trying to claim this land was never properly surveyed is lying. Eleanor studied the map carefully. Can we have this? As evidence? You can have the original. I don't need it anymore. But you be careful, girl. Whitlock's lawyers will try to discredit it, say it's a forgery, say I'm senile and making things up. You'll need more than just this map. We'll get it, Eleanor promised. Ruth reached across and gripped her hand. You've got spine, I like that. But spine doesn't stop bullets. You watch yourself. They left Ruth's house as the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the snow. Mercer was quiet on the ride back, the survey map carefully rolled and tucked inside his coat. Eleanor's mind was racing. They had the survey. They had evidence of bribery. They had the fake Hayes deed, pieces of a puzzle starting to come together. But Ruth's warning echoed in her thoughts. Spine doesn't stop bullets. Somewhere out there, Gideon Whitlock and his people were watching, waiting, planning their next move. And Eleanor had just made herself a target. They were a mile from the ranch when Mercer suddenly pulled his horse to a stop. Eleanor reined in beside him, breath fogging in the freezing air. What's wrong? She asked. Mercer was staring at the horizon, where a faint orange glow lit the darkening sky. That's coming from the ranch, he said quietly. Then he kicked his horse into a gallop. Eleanor followed, her heart hammering. The glow grew brighter as they approached. Not sunset, but fire. By the time they crested the final ridge, she could see flames engulfing the bunkhouse where she'd been staying. Ranch hands were already fighting the blaze with buckets of water, but it was clear they were losing. The building was old, dry wood. It burned fast and hot. Mercer dismounted before his horse fully stopped, sprinting toward the fire. Eleanor followed, but he grabbed her arm. Stay back. My things are gone. It's not worth dying for. They watched the bunkhouse collapse in on itself, sending sparks spiraling into the night sky. The heat was intense even from 50 feet away. One of the ranch hands, a young man named Cole, jogged over. His face was streaked with soot. Anyone hurt? Mercer demanded. No, sir. Building was empty when it started. We saw the smoke about an hour ago. Came running. Couldn't save it. How did it start? Cole hesitated. Found this nailed to the barn door. He handed over a piece of paper. Mercer read it, his expression going cold and hard. Then he passed it to Eleanor. The message was short, written in crude block letters. Leave now or burn with everything else. Eleanor stared at the words. Her hands were shaking, not from fear, but from rage. Everything she owned had been in that bunkhouse. Her clothes, her shoes, the letters from Marcus Hendry she'd kept as a reminder never to trust easily again. Gone. They're escalating, she said quietly. Mercer nodded. They know we found something. Probably have someone watching the town, saw us at the bank or at Ruth's place. This is a warning. It's also proof they're scared. If they weren't worried, they wouldn't bother with threats. You're not wrong. Mercer looked at the smoldering ruins, but it means things are about to get worse. Eleanor met his eyes. I'm not leaving. I wasn't suggesting you should, but you can't stay in the bunkhouse anymore. It's ash. You'll have to take one of the rooms in the main house. That appropriate? Don't care about appropriate. I care about keeping you alive. They stood in silence, watching the fire burn itself out. The night was cold and clear, stars bright overhead. Somewhere in the darkness, someone was watching. Someone who'd struck a match and walked away, confident they'd delivered their message. But they'd miscalculated. They'd thought burning her belongings would scare Eleanor off. Instead, they'd just taken away the last tether connecting her to her old life. The last reason to care about being careful, being quiet, being small. She'd come to Montana with nothing. Now she had even less. And somehow, that made her feel more powerful than she had in years. Tomorrow, she said, I want to learn how to shoot. Mercer glanced at her, then smiled, sharp and dangerous. Tomorrow, he agreed. The Colt revolver was heavier than Eleanor expected. Cold metal, solid weight, the kind of object that changed the balance of power just by existing in your hand. Mercer stood beside her in the clearing behind the barn, his own weapon holstered at his hip, watching as she tried to get comfortable with the grip. Don't strangle it, he said, firm but not tight. You're holding a tool, not wrestling a snake. Eleanor adjusted her grip. The morning was brutally cold, her breath coming out in white clouds, but she'd insisted on starting early. No point waiting. The burned-out bunkhouse was still smoking 100 yards away, a blackened skeleton against the snow. A reminder of what happened when you waited too long to learn how to defend yourself. Stance, Mercer continued, feet shoulder-width apart. Bend your knees slightly. You're trying to be stable, not rigid. She shifted her weight, found her balance. The gun felt less alien now. Still dangerous, still capable of ending a life with one wrong move, but at least she understood the mechanics of it. Good. Now, you're right-handed, so that's your shooting hand. Left hand supports underneath, both thumbs pointing forward along the frame. Don't cross your thumbs over the back. The slide will tear your skin open when it recoils. Eleanor positioned her hands the way he showed her. Mercer stepped closer, adjusted her elbows. Lock your arms, but keep them slightly bent. If you go completely rigid, the recoil will hurt. You want to absorb it, not fight it. He moved back. All right. See those bottles on the fence posts? 6 glass bottles stood in a ragged line about 20 feet away, catching the weak morning sun. Start with the one on the left. Line up your sights, that notch in the back, that post in the front. Put the post on your target. Breathe steady. When you're ready, squeeze the trigger. Don't jerk it. Smooth pressure. Eleanor sighted down the barrel. The bottle wavered in her vision, refusing to stay still. Her hands were shaking slightly, from cold, from nerves, from the weight of what she was holding. She squeezed. The gunshot cracked across the clearing, louder than she'd expected. The recoil kicked her arms up, and the bottle remained untouched on the fence post. Again, Mercer said. You flinched right before you fired, anticipating the recoil. Don't think about what happens after. Just focus on the squeeze. She fired again. Missed again. You're rushing. Take your time. Third shot. The bottle exploded in a spray of glass. There you go. Mercer's voice held a note of approval. Now do it 4 more times. By the time she'd shattered all 6 bottles, her arms ached and her ears rang despite the cotton wadding Mercer had given her to stuff in them. But she felt something she hadn't felt since arriving in Montana, capable, like she could handle whatever came next. You're a quick study, Mercer said as they walked back toward the house. Most people take weeks to get comfortable with a weapon. You did it in an hour. I'm motivated. That'll keep you alive longer than skill will. Inside, the house was warm. Eleanor had moved into a small bedroom on the 2nd floor the previous night. Sparse, but functional, with a bed, a dresser, and a window overlooking the eastern pastures. Her new accommodations. Everything she owned now fit in the pockets of her coat and the dress she was wearing, simplified in a way. Harder to run when you had nothing to carry. Mercer poured coffee while Eleanor spread the documents they'd gathered across the kitchen table. The original survey from Ruth, the bank records showing the Hayes account, the fake deed from 1868, correspondence between John Mercer and various territorial officials. Pieces of a pattern starting to emerge. I need to go into town again, Eleanor said. The land office has a territorial archives section. If Hayes Properties was ever a legitimate business, there'll be incorporation papers, owner registration, something. You think you'll find anything? I think if it's fake, there won't be anything. And that absence is evidence too. Mercer nodded slowly. I'll ride with you. You don't have to. I can handle. They burned your bunkhouse, Eleanor. I'm not letting you ride alone. She wanted to argue, to prove she didn't need protection. But the truth was, she'd feel safer with him there. Pride was one thing. Stupidity was another. They rode out an hour later, the sky low and gray with the promise of more snow. The land stretched out around them in rolling white hills broken by dark stands of pine and cottonwood. Beautiful in a harsh, unforgiving way. The kind of beauty that killed you if you weren't careful. Can I ask you something? Eleanor said after they'd been riding for a while. Go ahead. Why'd you leave the Pinkertons? Seems like that was steady work, probably paid better than ranching. Mercer was quiet for a moment, his eyes on the horizon. I got tired of hunting people. Spent 12 years tracking fugitives, breaking strikes, protecting railroad interests. Started to realize I was usually working for the wrong side. The rich and powerful using the law to crush anyone who got in their way. He glanced at her. Sound familiar? Very. My father died while I was back east chasing down some poor bastard who'd stolen from a mine owner to feed his family. Took me 3 months to even hear about it. By the time I got back out here, the ranch had passed through 2 other owners and was falling apart. I bought it back, figured I'd try to build something honest, something that mattered. And now Whitlock's trying to take it. Story of the West. The powerful take from the weak until someone finally stands up and stops them. Eleanor thought about that. About power and weakness. About who decided which was which. She'd spent her whole life being told she was weak, too female, too opinionated, too damaged by scandal to be useful. But sitting here on horseback with a gun at her hip and evidence of fraud in her saddlebag, she didn't feel weak. She felt dangerous. They reached Black Hollow just before noon. The land office was a small building near the courthouse, run by a clerk named Martin Jessup, who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. He had thinning hair, ink-stained fingers, and the defeated expression of a man who'd given up on ambition years ago. Help you? He said without looking up from his paperwork. I need to search the territorial business registrations, Eleanor said. Specifically, anything filed under the name Hayes Properties or Robert Hayes. Jessup finally looked up. His eyes flicked to Mercer, then back to Eleanor. What's this about? Land title research. For who? Does it matter? Jessup's expression soured. If you're working for Whitlock's people, I can save you the trouble. They've already been through these records 6 times. We're not working for Whitlock, Mercer said flatly. We're working against him. Something shifted in Jessup's demeanor. Not quite hope, but at least interest. You're Mercer, the rancher fighting the land claim. That's right. Jessup stood and walked to a filing cabinet. Hayes Properties. I remember that name coming up a few months back. One of Whitlock's lawyers was asking about it. He pulled out a folder, flipped through papers. Here, business incorporation filed in 1867. Owner of record, Robert Hayes. Business address listed as Black Hollow, Montana Territory. Except there's a problem. What problem? Eleanor asked. The incorporation was filed, but there's no corresponding territorial tax records. No business licenses. No property holdings registered under that name. It's like someone created the paperwork to make the business look real, but never actually operated it. Eleanor felt that familiar sensation of pieces clicking together. Can I see the incorporation papers? Jessup handed them over. Eleanor studied the signature, the handwriting, the official stamps. Then she pulled out one of John Mercer's letters from her bag, something Ruth had copied from the county archives, dated 1867, with his authentic signature. The handwriting wasn't even close. Different slant, different pressure, different letter formation. The Hayes Incorporation papers were signed by someone pretending to be Robert Hayes, but they'd done a sloppy job. This is forged, she said. Look at the R in Robert. It's got that distinctive loop at the bottom. Now look at other documents from the same year filed by legitimate businesses. None of them have that same quirk. It's too consistent, like someone practiced a signature and got one letter too perfect. Jessup leaned over her shoulder. You're right. I never noticed that before. Can you testify to the lack of tax records? Eleanor asked. In court, if necessary. Jessup's enthusiasm dimmed. Testify against Whitlock? That's a quick way to lose my job. Or worse, it's also the right thing to do. The right thing doesn't pay my rent, miss. Mercer stepped forward. What if it did? What if there was a fund to support people willing to stand up and testify? Enough to cover lost wages, relocation if necessary? Does such a fund exist? It could. There are 17 ranching families in this valley fighting the same fight I am. If we pool resources, we can protect witnesses. Jessup looked tempted. Scared, but tempted. Let me think about it. Don't think too long, Mercer said. This is moving fast. They left the land office with copies of the incorporation papers. Eleanor's mind was racing, connecting dots, building timelines. The fake business created in 1867, the deed transfer in 1868. Thomas Birch hired in 1882, right before the legal challenges started, a pattern spanning 15 years. This isn't just about your ranch, she said as they walked toward the general store. Whitlock's been planning this for over a decade, building false paper trails, planting evidence, waiting for the right moment to strike. Which means he's done this before, Mercer said grimly. Other ranches, other families. We might not be the first. Eleanor stopped walking. We need to find out who else lost land to Whitlock in the past 5 years. If there's a pattern, if we can show this is systematic fraud, it becomes a federal case. That'll take time we might not have. Then we work fast. They bought supplies at the general store, food, ammunition, lamp oil, and a new coat for Eleanor since her old one had burned. The store owner, a woman named Della Pritchard, packed everything with practiced efficiency while keeping up a steady stream of conversation. Heard about your bunkhouse, she said to Mercer. Damn shame. You know who did it? Got a good idea. Della glanced around to make sure no other customers were listening, then lowered her voice. You're not the only one having troubles. Jim Hawthorne's cattle got poisoned last week. 15 head dead. Sarah Mackenzie's well got contaminated with something that made her whole family sick. And Ben Foster's hay barn collapsed, supposedly from snow weight, but folks are saying the support beams had been cut partway through. Eleanor and Mercer exchanged looks. All of them fighting land claims? Eleanor asked. Every single one. Whitlock's putting pressure on anyone who won't sell. Della wrapped the supplies in brown paper and twine. People are scared. Some are talking about giving up, taking whatever offer he makes, just to get out alive. That's exactly what he wants, Mercer said. I know, but you can't blame them. They've got children to protect, livelihoods to salvage. Standing up to Whitlock might be noble, but it could also get you killed. They loaded the supplies onto their horses. The temperature was dropping, wind picking up, storm coming. We need to talk to those other ranchers, Eleanor said once they were out of earshot of the town. Compare notes, coordinate evidence. If we're all fighting separately, Whitlock can pick us off one by one. But if we present a united front, he'll come at us harder. Maybe. Or maybe he'll realize he's facing something he can't intimidate away. Mercer looked at her with something like admiration. You don't back down, do you? I've got nothing left to lose. That makes me dangerous. They rode hard for the ranch, trying to beat the storm. Snow started falling as they reached the boundary fence. Thick flakes that reduced visibility to a few dozen yards. By the time they reached the barn, it was a full blizzard. Cole helped them stable the horses while Mercer and Eleanor hauled the supplies into the house. Inside, Eleanor shed her new coat and went straight to the office, spreading out the new documents alongside the old ones. The fake incorporation, the forged deed, the survey, the bank records. A map of fraud taking shape. She worked through dinner, barely noticing when Mercer brought her a plate of food. Worked through the evening while the storm howled outside. Somewhere around midnight, Mercer appeared in the doorway. You need to sleep. I need to finish this timeline. Eleanor. His voice was firm. You've been at it for 16 hours. Your eyes are crossing. Whatever you're building, it'll still be here in the morning. She wanted to argue, but he was right. Her vision was blurring, her thoughts getting tangled. She stood, swayed slightly, caught herself on the desk. Mercer crossed the room and steadied her. Come on, bed. I'm fine. You're exhausted. There's a difference. He guided her upstairs to her room. She sat on the edge of the bed, suddenly aware of how bone-tired she was. Mercer lingered in the doorway. For what it's worth, he said quietly, You've done more in 5 days than most people could do in 5 months. Whatever happens, you should know that. Eleanor looked up at him. In the lamplight, his face was all hard angles and shadows. A man used to surviving alone, used to not trusting anyone, but he was trusting her. "We're going to win this," she said. "Maybe. Or maybe we'll go down fighting. Either way, I'm glad you're here." He left before she could respond. Eleanor lay back on the bed, still fully clothed, and stared at the ceiling. Outside, the storm raged. Inside, something else was building. A different kind of storm. One made of evidence and determination, and the slow-burning anger of people who'd been pushed too far. She fell asleep thinking about forged signatures and fake businesses, and the look on Gideon Whitlock's face when she proved he was a fraud. The storm lasted 3 days. 3 days of being snowed in, unable to travel, forced to work with what they had. Eleanor used the time to organize everything into a coherent narrative. She created a master timeline starting in 1862, when Montana was still a territory, tracking every land transfer, every survey, every suspicious transaction. She cross-referenced names, looking for patterns. She wrote out her analysis in clear, precise language, the kind that would hold up in court. By the time the storm broke, she had something concrete. Not just evidence, but a story. A story about systematic land fraud spanning 2 decades, about forged documents and bribed officials and families destroyed for profit. On the 4th morning, Mercer came into the office and found her surrounded by papers organized into neat stacks. "I'm ready," she said. "We need to call a meeting. All the ranchers Whitlock's targeting. I want to show them what we've found, coordinate our defense." "That's risky. Getting everyone together in one place makes us vulnerable. Staying separated makes us weak. Whitlock wins when we're isolated. We need strength in numbers." Mercer considered this. "Where?" "Here. Your ranch. This weekend. We tell people to come after dark. Keep it quiet." "And if someone talks? If word gets back to Whitlock?" Eleanor met his eyes. "Then we'll know we've rattled him. And that's when people make mistakes." The meeting was set for Saturday night. Mercer rode out to spread the word while Eleanor continued refining her presentation. She practiced in front of the office mirror, timing her explanations, anticipating questions. She'd learned from watching her father work. A good case wasn't just about having evidence. It was about telling a compelling story that made the evidence impossible to ignore. Saturday came cold and clear. As darkness fell, people started arriving. They came in small groups, careful not to draw attention. Jim Hawthorne, a weathered rancher in his 50s who'd lost cattle to poison. Sarah Mackenzie, a widow managing her late husband's land while raising 3 children. Ben Foster, whose barn had collapsed under suspicious circumstances. Others Eleanor didn't know, all with the same hard look of people who'd been pushed to the edge. They gathered in the ranch house parlor, a dozen men and women crowding into a space meant for half that number. The air was thick with tension and the smell of wood smoke from the fireplace. Mercer stood in front of the group. "Thank you for coming. I know it's dangerous, but we need to talk about what's happening in this valley, and we need to do it together." Eleanor Vane has been investigating Whitlock's operations. She's found something important. All eyes turned to Eleanor. She felt a flutter of nerves, but pushed it down. This was what she was good at. This was what her father had trained her to do. "Gideon Whitlock is running a systematic land fraud operation," she began. "He's not just buying property. He's stealing it using forged documents and manufactured legal disputes. I've traced his methods back nearly 20 years." She laid out the evidence piece by piece: the fake Hayes Business Incorporation, the forged deed from 1868, the pattern of bribing bookkeepers and clerks to access private records, the suspicious withdrawals from Hayes Properties' bank account, the missing surveys and altered plat maps. "He plants the seeds years in advance," Eleanor explained. "Creates false paper trails, waits until property values rise, then activates the fraud. By the time you realize what's happening, you're buried in legal challenges that cost more to fight than your land is worth." Jim Hawthorne leaned forward. "You can prove this? I can prove it happened to Silas's ranch. But I need your help to prove it's a pattern. If any of you have experienced similar things, missing documents, mysterious transactions, bookkeepers who disappeared suddenly, I need to see your records." "Why should we trust you?" This from a younger man Eleanor didn't recognize. You show up out of nowhere, start asking questions, and suddenly buildings are burning. How do we know you're not working for Whitlock? The room went quiet. Eleanor felt the weight of suspicious eyes. That's fair, she said. You don't know me. You have no reason to trust me. But I can tell you this. I came to Montana because I was lied to and left with nothing. I took this job because I needed work. I'm staying because I'm tired of watching powerful men destroy good people and get away with it. If you want verification, ask Ruth Calloway in town. Ask Martin Jessup at the land office. Ask anyone who's seen me work. I'm not perfect, and I'm not a saint, but I'm on your side. Sarah Mackenzie spoke up. My husband fought Whitlock for 3 years before he died. Heart attack, the doctor said. But I think the stress killed him. Whitlock made our lives hell, constant legal threats, harassment, vandalism. We couldn't prove anything, but we knew. Her voice cracked. I don't want his death to mean nothing. If there's a chance to stop Whitlock, I'll help however I can. Others nodded. The mood shifted from suspicion to something harder, angrier. These were people who'd been victimized, who'd felt powerless, who were ready to fight back. We need to gather all our evidence, Eleanor said. Deeds, surveys, financial records, correspondence, anything that shows a pattern. We present it as a unified case to federal authorities. Not just one ranch with a boundary dispute, but systematic fraud affecting multiple properties across Montana territory. What if the authorities are in Whitlock's pocket too? Ben Foster asked. Then we go higher. Territorial governor, federal marshals, newspapers back east. We make enough noise that someone has to pay attention. And if they don't? The suspicious young man pressed. What then? Eleanor didn't have a good answer for that. She looked at Mercer. Then we fight, he said simply. We protect our land, we protect each other, and we make it so expensive for Whitlock that he decides we're not worth the trouble. That's a war, someone said. It's already a war. We're just finally fighting back. The meeting lasted another hour. People shared their stories, compared experiences, found common threads. A woman named Catherine Price described how her family's original land grant documents had vanished from the county office, replaced with versions showing different boundaries. Another rancher, Tom Brennan, talked about a surveyor who'd offered to remark his property lines for an unusually low fee, then produced measurements that contradicted his deed. Everyone had something. Everyone had been targeted. By the time people left, again in small groups, again after dark, Eleanor had commitments from 8 families to share their records. It wasn't everyone, but it was enough. Enough to show a pattern, enough to build a federal case. Mercer walked the last guests to their horses, while Eleanor started organizing the information people had shared. Her head was spinning with names and dates and details, but underneath it all was a growing sense of momentum. This was happening. They were actually doing this. Mercer returned and found her at the kitchen table, writing notes. You did good tonight, he said. You got them to trust you. That's not easy with this crowd. They don't trust me. They trust that I hate Whitlock as much as they do. Sometimes that's the same thing. He poured 2 glasses of whiskey and handed her one. To fighting back. Eleanor raised her glass. To fighting back. The whiskey burned going down, but it warmed her from the inside. Outside, the night was quiet, the storm long gone. But Eleanor knew the calm wouldn't last. They'd just declared war on one of the most powerful men in Montana. Whitlock would respond. And when he did, it would be brutal. She thought about the gun Mercer had taught her to use. Thought about the evidence stacked in the office. Thought about the people who'd come tonight, scared but determined. He's going to come at us hard now, she said. Mercer nodded. Probably. But we've got something he doesn't expect. What's that? We've got the truth. And people who are willing to fight for it. Eleanor wanted to believe that was enough. Wanted to believe truth and determination could overcome money and corruption. But she'd seen too much of the world to be naive. Truth was a weapon, but it wasn't always the strongest one. Still, it was the weapon they had, and she'd learned how to use it well. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, drinking whiskey and watching the fire burn low in the hearth. Eleanor felt something shift between them, a partnership becoming something deeper, more personal. Mercer wasn't just her employer anymore. He was an ally, maybe even a friend. I should get some sleep, she said finally. Tomorrow we start collecting those records. Tomorrow, Mercer agreed. But Eleanor? She paused at the doorway. Thank you for staying, for fighting. You could have left after the fire. Where would I go? This is the first place I've felt useful in 5 years. It's more than that. You're not just useful. You're necessary. The words hung in the air between them. Eleanor felt something warm unfold in her chest. Something she'd thought long dead. Not quite trust. Trust took time. But the beginning of it. The possibility. Good night, Silas. Good night. She climbed the stairs to her room, the whiskey still warm in her stomach. Through the window, she could see the dark shapes of the outbuildings, the burned skeleton of the bunkhouse, evidence of what Whitlock was capable of, but also evidence of what he feared. He wouldn't bother threatening them if he wasn't worried, wouldn't waste resources burning buildings if he thought they were harmless. Eleanor undressed and climbed into bed, pulling the thick quilts up to her chin. Her last thought before sleep took her was simple and fierce. Let him be afraid. Let him lose sleep wondering what we'll find next. Let him understand that he picked the wrong people to destroy. She fell asleep with a smile on her face. The revelation came 3 days after the meeting, buried in a stack of records Sarah Mackenzie had delivered personally to the ranch. Eleanor was cross-referencing property transfers when she noticed something that made her hands go still on the paper. Marcus Hendry. The name that had lured her to Montana. The phantom suitor who'd never existed, except he had existed. Right here, in a deed transfer dated 1879, selling 240 acres to the Western Montana Land and Development Company. Signed by Marcus L. Hendry, witnessed by Samuel Garrett, the same man who'd paid off Thomas Birch. Eleanor's throat went tight. She read the document 3 times, checking the name, the date, the signatures. Then she pulled out the letters she'd somehow managed to save from the bunkhouse fire. They'd been in her coat pocket that day. She spread them next to the deed and compared handwriting. Different, completely different. The Marcus Hendry who'd written her those careful, romantic letters about Montana opportunities and respectable marriage was not the Marcus Hendry who'd sold land to Whitlock's company, which meant someone had stolen a real person's identity to create the marriage scheme, had used a legitimate name from land records to make the scam more believable. And Eleanor hadn't been a random victim. She'd been specifically targeted. "Son of a bitch," she whispered. Mercer looked up from the other end of the table where he'd been reviewing grazing contracts. "What'd you find?" Eleanor's hands were shaking, not from fear this time, but from a rage so pure it felt like ice in her veins. "The man who lured me to Montana. Marcus Hendry. He was real, and he sold property to Whitlock 3 years ago." Mercer crossed to her side of the table, read over her shoulder. She watched his expression harden as he put the pieces together. "They researched you," he said quietly, "found out you worked for a law practice, that you understood contracts and land records. They needed someone with those skills inside a target ranch, so they created a marriage scheme using a name from their own files. I wasn't just bait. I was supposed to be their inside agent." Eleanor's voice was steady despite the fury building inside her. "They expected me to spy on you, feed them information about your defenses, maybe even sabotage your records from within. But you didn't know. You couldn't have." "Doesn't matter. They still used me, turned me into a weapon and sent me here blind." She stood abruptly, the chair scraping against wood. "I need to find him, the real Marcus Hendry. If he sold to Whitlock, he might know something." "Eleanor, wait. No, this is personal now. They didn't just try to steal your land. They stole months of my life, my money, my dignity. They made me complicit in their scheme without my knowledge. I want answers." Mercer caught her arm gently. "I understand, but charging off angry is how you get hurt. We do this smart." Eleanor wanted to argue, wanted to storm out and hunt down every person involved in bringing her to Montana under false pretenses. But Mercer was right. Anger made you sloppy. Her father had taught her that. She took a breath. Another. Let the rage settle into something colder and more useful. "Fine, smart. Where do we start?" "The deed says Hendry sold in 1879. That's 4 years ago. We find out if he's still in the territory, if he's alive, if he'll talk. But we do it carefully." They rode into Black Hollow the next morning with a cover story ready. Eleanor would ask around about Marcus Hendry, claiming to be settling a family estate matter back east. Nothing threatening, nothing that would raise alarms. Just routine questions about a man who'd once owned property in the area. The general store owner, Della Pritchard, remembered him. Marcus Hendry. Sure, I knew him. Ran a small cattle operation north of here until he sold out. Nice enough fellow, though he drank too much. Last I heard he moved to Helena, works at a freight company. He's alive then? Eleanor kept her voice neutral. Was 6 months ago. His sister still lives here. Mary Hendry runs the boarding house on 2nd Street. She'd know more. Eleanor thanked her and left before Della could ask why she was interested. Outside, Mercer was waiting with the horses. Boarding house, 2nd Street, Eleanor said. Mary Hendry was a thin woman in her 40s with tired eyes and careful hands. She opened the boarding house door with the wariness of someone used to trouble. Help you? I'm looking for information about Marcus Hendry. I understand he's your brother? Mary's expression shuddered. What's he done now? Nothing, as far as I know. I'm researching a property transaction from 1879. He sold land to a development company, and I'm trying to verify some details. You a lawyer? I work for one. Close enough to the truth. Mary studied Eleanor for a long moment, then sighed. Come in, but I don't have much time. The boarding house parlor smelled like boiled cabbage and old tobacco. Mary gestured to a worn sofa and sat across from them in a straight-backed chair. Marcus sold that land 4 years ago, she began. Got a decent price for it, too. More than it was worth, honestly. He was happy at first. Paid off his debts, bought drinks for everyone in town. Then things went bad. How bad? Mercer asked. He started getting letters, threats. Someone saying he'd defrauded the sale, that he'd lied about the property boundaries, that they'd sue him for everything he had left. Marcus got scared, started drinking heavier. Eventually, he just left. Went to Helena, found work there. Haven't seen him in 2 years. Eleanor felt pieces clicking together. Who bought the property? Western Montana Land and Development. Big company, lots of lawyers. Marcus thought he was getting a fair deal. Turns out they'd set him up. Set him up how? Mary's hands twisted in her lap. The surveyor who measured his property before the sale, a man named Carson, he worked for the company. Changed the boundary markers after Marcus signed the deed. Made it look like Marcus had sold them less land than the deed specified. Then they threatened to sue unless he signed documents saying the original sale was valid, as measured, not as written. Did he sign? Eleanor already knew the answer. He did. What choice did he have? They had lawyers, money, everything. He had nothing but a piece of paper saying he sold land he couldn't prove he'd owned correctly. Mary looked at Eleanor. Why are you asking about this now? Because they're doing the same thing to other ranchers. Using fraudulent surveys, forged documents, legal intimidation. Your brother was one of many. Mary's face hardened. I told him to fight, told him to get a lawyer, to stand up to them. But Marcus wasn't built for fighting. He just wanted it over. Would he testify? Mercer asked. If we brought a case against the company, would he be willing to tell what happened? I don't know. He's scared. And honestly, I don't blame him. These people are dangerous. Eleanor leaned forward. Miss Hendry, did your brother ever mention a marriage scheme? Letters sent to women back east, promising opportunities in Montana? Mary frowned. No. Why? Because someone used his name and identity to lure me here under false pretenses. I came to Montana thinking I'd been corresponding with Marcus Hendry about marriage. But the man who wrote those letters wasn't your brother. Understanding dawned on Mary's face, followed by anger. They used his name after they'd already destroyed him? They did, and I suspect they've done it before. It's perfect. Use the identity of someone they've already crushed, someone too scared to make trouble. If the scheme falls apart, the blame falls on a man who can't defend himself. Mary stood abruptly. I'll write to Marcus. Tell him what you're doing. Maybe if he knows he's not alone, that other people are fighting back, he'll find some courage. She paused. I can't promise anything. That's all we can ask, Eleanor said. They left the boarding house with more questions than answers, but at least now Eleanor understood. She hadn't been randomly targeted. She'd been carefully selected, a woman with the right skills, the right desperation, the right vulnerability. They'd researched her background, crafted letters that would appeal to someone in her position, used a stolen identity to make it convincing. It was coldly brilliant, and it made her want to burn Whitlock's entire operation to the ground. You all right? Mercer asked as they rode toward the edge of town. No, but I will be, once we destroy him. They were almost to the town limits when a rider intercepted them. A young man Eleanor didn't recognize, riding hard, his horse lathered with sweat. "Mr. Mercer, been looking for you. It's Tom Brennan's place. It's under attack." Mercer's expression went cold. "What kind of attack?" "Armed men. At least 6 of them. They rode in an hour ago, told Brennan he had 24 hours to vacate or they'd burn him out. He sent his wife and kids to his brother's place, but he's staying. Says he won't abandon his land." "Damn fool," Mercer muttered, then louder. "Who else knows?" "I've been spreading word. Jim Hawthorne and Ben Foster are already riding out there. Sarah Mackenzie's gathering anyone else who'll come." Mercer looked at Eleanor. "Go back to the ranch. Take Cole and the others. Secure the property. If they're hitting Brennan, they might hit us next." "Like hell I'm going back. You taught me to shoot for a reason." "Eleanor, don't. We're partners in this, which means I go where you go. Besides, you need every gun you can get." Mercer looked like he wanted to argue, but there wasn't time. He turned to the messenger. "Lead the way." They rode hard across frozen ground, the horse's breath steaming in the cold air. Eleanor checked her revolver as they went, making sure it was loaded, making sure the safety was off. Her hands were steady. Whatever fear she'd felt when she first arrived in Montana had burned away, replaced by something harder. Tom Brennan's ranch sat in a valley between 2 low ridges, a modest spread with a house, barn, and several outbuildings. Smoke rose from the chimney, but the place had an eerie stillness. As they approached, Eleanor could see why. 6 men sat on horseback in front of the house, blocking the entrance. They were armed, rifles across their saddles, pistols at their hips, not trying to hide their weapons or their intentions. They looked like exactly what they were, hired muscle sent to intimidate. Tom Brennan stood on his porch, a shotgun in his hands. He was a big man, broad-shouldered and stubborn-looking, the kind who'd rather die than back down. But he was also smart enough to know 6 against 1 were bad odds. Jim Hawthorne and Ben Foster were already there, positioned behind a fence about 50 yards away. Not close enough to engage, but close enough to witness. As Mercer, Eleanor, and the messenger rode up, the balance shifted. Now it was 9 against 6. Better odds. The leader of the hired men was a lean, weathered individual with a scar running down his left cheek. He watched their arrival with cold calculation. "This is private property," he called out. "You folks should move along." Mercer reined his horse to a stop. "Funny, I was about to say the same thing to you." "We have business with Mr. Brennan. Doesn't concern you." "When you threaten my neighbors, it concerns me." The scarred man smiled without warmth. "We're not threatening anyone, just delivering a legal notice. Mr. Brennan's property title is under dispute. He's been asked to vacate pending resolution." "Asked by who?" "Western Montana Land and Development Company. They have a legitimate claim to this land." "Let me see the paperwork," Eleanor said. All eyes turned to her. The scarred man's expression shifted, surprised, then dismissive. "And who the hell are you?" "Someone who can read legal documents. If you've got legitimate business here, you'll have proper court orders. Let me see them." The man hesitated. That hesitation told Eleanor everything she needed to know. "You don't have any paperwork, do you?" she pressed. "This isn't a legal eviction, it's intimidation." "Lady, you should stay out of things you don't understand. I understand land law better than you do. I also understand that what you're doing right now is criminal trespass and harassment. Tom Brennan owns this property legally. Unless you can produce a court order signed by a judge, you need to leave." The scarred man's hand moved toward his rifle. Eleanor's hand dropped to her revolver. Around her, she heard the click of hammers being pulled back. The other ranchers had weapons ready. "Easy," Mercer said quietly. "Nobody needs to die today." "Your woman's got a sharp tongue," the scarred man said. "Might get her in trouble." "She's not my woman. She's my bookkeeper. And she's right. You've got no legal standing here, so you can ride out peaceful or we can make it unpleasant. Your choice." The tension stretched tight. Eleanor's heart hammered, but she kept her hand steady on her weapon. This was the moment. Either they'd back down or blood would spill. The scarred man looked at his companions, calculating odds. 6 guns against 9. Not impossible, but messy. And whatever Whitlock was paying them, it probably wasn't enough to die for. "This isn't over," he said finally. "Mr. Brennan's got until tomorrow to reconsider. After that, things get serious." "Tomorrow we'll have the sheriff here," Jim Hawthorne called out. Along with witnesses and documentation, you come back, you'll be arrested. The scarred man laughed. Sheriff Talbot, he won't do a damn thing. You all know that. He was probably right. But the threat was enough to make him think twice. He gestured to his men, and they turned their horses, rode out slowly, deliberately, making sure everyone understood this was a tactical retreat, not a defeat. Eleanor didn't lower her weapon until they were out of rifle range. Then her hands started shaking, the adrenaline draining away and leaving her weak-kneed. Tom Brennan came down from his porch. Appreciate the help. Don't know what would have happened if you hadn't shown up. They'd have burned you out, Mercer said bluntly. Tonight, tomorrow, whenever you let your guard down. You can't stay here alone. This is my land. I'm not abandoning it. Nobody's asking you to abandon it, but you need help guarding it. We set up a rotation, 3 or 4 people here at all times, armed, ready. They come back, they face real resistance. Sarah Mackenzie rode up then, leading 4 more ranchers. Word had spread fast. The valley was mobilizing. We need to organize properly, she said. Figure out who's most vulnerable, who needs protection. We can't be everywhere at once, but we can make sure nobody's isolated. They spent the next hour planning, creating schedules, assigning watch rotations, deciding who had the best defensive positions. It was basic militia organization, born from necessity. If the law wouldn't protect them, they'd protect each other. Eleanor watched it come together and felt something shift. These weren't just individual ranchers fighting isolated battles anymore. They were becoming a community, a force. And Whitlock hadn't counted on that. As the sun began to set, Mercer pulled Eleanor aside. You did good today, calling their bluff about the paperwork. I was terrified. Didn't show. That's what matters. Eleanor looked at the group of ranchers still discussing plans and strategies. This is going to get worse before it gets better, isn't it? Yeah, Whitlock's going to escalate. Today was just a warning shot. Then we need to move faster, get the evidence compiled, take it to federal authorities before he can strike again. Agreed. How long do you need? Eleanor calculated quickly. 3 days? Maybe 4? If everyone delivers their records like they promised, I can have a complete case ready. Then that's our timeline. 3 days. Mercer's jaw set, and I'm writing to Helena. There's a federal marshal there, man named Carson Wade. Used to work with him during my Pinkerton days. If anyone will listen, it's him. That's a hard ride in winter. I'll manage. But Eleanor, while I'm gone, you need to stay at the ranch. Keep the hands close. Don't take risks. She wanted to argue, wanted to insist she could handle herself. But she'd seen the look in the scarred man's eyes when he'd called her Mercer's woman. She'd become a target, not just because of what she knew, but because hurting her would hurt Mercer. Fine, but you better come back. Mercer smiled slightly. Plan to. Got too much invested in this fight to quit now. They rode back to the ranch as darkness fell. Eleanor's mind was already racing ahead, planning how to organize the remaining evidence, what arguments would be most compelling to federal authorities, what documentation they'd need to prove systematic fraud. But underneath the planning was something darker. The memory of that moment when the scarred man's hand had moved toward his rifle, the knowledge that she'd been ready to shoot him, that she would have if it came to it. Montana had changed her, or maybe it had just stripped away the parts that didn't matter, leaving only what was necessary for survival. Mercer left before dawn the next morning. Eleanor watched from her window as he rode out, saddlebags packed, rifle across his back. Helena was a 3-day ride in good weather. In winter, it could take longer. She'd be managing the ranch alone, coordinating the evidence gathering, keeping everyone organized. No pressure. She spent the morning working through Sarah Mackenzie's records, finding pattern after pattern of the same fraud tactics. Altered surveys, missing documents, suspicious transactions. Every family had a similar story. It was almost lazy in its repetition. Whitlock's people had found a formula that worked and used it over and over. Around noon, Cole knocked on the office door. Miss Vane, there's someone here to see you. Who? Says his name's Thomas Birch. Eleanor's blood went cold. The former bookkeeper. The man who'd been paid off and disappeared. Either he was incredibly stupid to come back, or something had changed. She checked her revolver before going downstairs. Thomas Birch stood in the ranch house kitchen, looking nothing like Eleanor had imagined. He was young, maybe 30, with thinning hair and the soft hands of someone who'd never done hard labor. He looked scared, shifting his weight from foot to foot, eyes darting to the windows. "Miss Vane? That's me? You've got about 30 seconds to explain why I shouldn't shoot you where you stand." Birch went pale. "I came to help. To tell you what I know." "You mean what you sold to Whitlock's people before you ran?" "Yes. No, it's complicated." He ran a hand through his hair. "Can we talk? Please?" Eleanor gestured to a chair but didn't sit herself, didn't lower her weapon. "Talk." Birch collapsed into the chair like his strings had been cut. "They approached me and Helena 6 months before I came here, offered me good money to take a bookkeeping job at a ranch, gain trust, report back on property records and any evidence that might be used in title disputes. I needed the money. My mother was sick, needed medicine I couldn't afford. So I said yes. And you fed them information about Mercer's property every week, what documents existed, what was missing, where the vulnerabilities were. They paid me $50 a month plus my regular wages. When they were ready to file their claim, they told me to disappear, made it look like I'd run off, paid me $200 severance. "Why come back?" Eleanor asked. "Why risk it?" Birch met her eyes. "Because my mother died 3 weeks ago. And I realized the money I'd taken, the betrayal, it was all for nothing. She died anyway. And now I've got blood on my hands from what's happening in this valley." "You don't have blood on your hands. Not yet. But people could die because of what you did." "I know. That's why I'm here. I want to testify. I want to tell federal authorities everything. Who recruited me, how the scheme works, what they're planning next." Eleanor studied him. He looked genuine, broken, guilty, desperate for redemption. But people were good liars. Whitlock could have sent him here as a plant, a way to find out what they knew. "Why should I trust you?" "Because I brought proof." Birch pulled a folded envelope from his coat. "Correspondence between me and Samuel Garrett, payment receipts, a list of other bookkeepers and clerks they've recruited across Montana Territory, everything." Eleanor took the envelope, opened it carefully. Inside were letters, receipts, a ledger page with names and locations. It looked genuine. More than that, it looked damning. "If this is real," she said slowly, "this is enough to bring down the entire operation. It's real. I kept copies of everything. Insurance, in case they ever tried to silence me. Turns out I was right to be paranoid. You think they'd kill you? I think they'd kill anyone who threatens their business. You, me, Mercer, we're all liabilities now." Eleanor felt the weight of the documents in her hand. This was it. The missing piece. Not just evidence of fraud against individual ranchers, but proof of a coordinated criminal conspiracy spanning years and multiple properties. "Cole," she called. The ranch hand appeared in the doorway. "Ma'am? Take Mr. Birch to the spare room. He's staying here until Mr. Mercer returns. Post a guard outside his door. Nobody comes or goes without my permission." "You don't trust me," Birch said. "Not even a little bit. But I trust evidence. And if what you've brought checks out, we might actually win this." After Birch was secured upstairs, Eleanor spread the new documents across the office desk. Her hands were shaking again, but this time from excitement. Lists of names, clerks, surveyors, bookkeepers, all on Whitlock's payroll, payment schedules, instructions on which documents to alter or steal. It was a roadmap of the entire criminal enterprise. She worked through the afternoon and into the evening, cross-referencing names with property disputes, matching timelines, building connections. By midnight, she had something that looked less like scattered evidence and more like a federal indictment. She was so absorbed in the work that she didn't hear the footsteps on the porch until Cole shouted a warning. Eleanor grabbed her revolver and ran to the window. Outside in the moonlight, she could see riders, at least a dozen, maybe more, surrounding the ranch house. They weren't trying to hide. This wasn't a subtle threat. This was an attack. Cole and the other ranch hands were taking positions, behind water troughs, in the barn, anywhere that offered cover. Eleanor's heart hammered as she checked her ammunition. 6 bullets, not enough if this turned into a real fight. A voice called out from the darkness, "Send out Thomas Birch and nobody gets hurt." So that was it. They'd tracked Birch here, wanted him silenced before he could talk. Eleanor's mind raced. If she gave up Birch, he'd be dead within the hour. But if she refused, everyone at the ranch was at risk. The hands, herself, the evidence. The evidence. She ran back to the office, grabbed the documents, all of them, everything she'd compiled, Birch's papers, the survey from Ruth, the bank records, stuffed them into a leather satchel, along with her notes. If the house burned, this couldn't be lost. "Miss Vane?" Cole shouted from downstairs. "What do we do?" Eleanor came to the top of the stairs. "We don't give them anything. Hold your positions. Fire only if they attack first." "They've got us outnumbered 3-1. Then make every shot count." She wasn't sure where the words came from. She wasn't a soldier, wasn't trained for combat, but something in her father's voice echoed in her memory, his calm in courtroom battles, his refusal to be intimidated by opposing lawyers with deeper pockets and louder voices. "Stand your ground. Make them prove their case. Don't blink first." Eleanor went to her bedroom window, opened it slightly, aimed her revolver at the shapes in the darkness. Her hands were steady now. Fear had burned away, leaving only cold determination. "Last chance," the voice called. "Send him out." "Go to hell," Eleanor shouted back. Silence. Then the sound of rifles being cocked. This was it. They were really going to do this. She was about to be in her first gunfight, outnumbered and probably outmatched, defending a man who'd betrayed Mercer and evidence that could topple an empire. The absurdity of it almost made her laugh. 3 weeks ago, she'd been standing on a train platform with 11 cents and no future. Now she was ready to die defending Montana ranchers from land fraud. Life was strange. The first shot cracked through the night, splintering wood near Cole's position. He returned fire. Then everyone was shooting, muzzle flashes lighting up the darkness, the sound deafening. Eleanor aimed at a rider trying to circle toward the barn, squeezed the trigger. The recoil kicked her arms up. She didn't know if she hit him, but he veered off. She fired again. Again. Keeping her breathing steady, remembering Mercer's instructions. Don't panic, don't waste shots, make them count. The attack lasted maybe 5 minutes, though it felt like hours. Then, as suddenly as it started, the riders pulled back. Not retreating, regrouping, getting ready for another push. Eleanor reloaded with shaking hands. How many rounds did she have left? Not enough. Never enough. "Hold!" she shouted to the hands below. "They're coming again!" But they didn't come. Instead, the riders stayed at a distance, still surrounding the ranch, but not attacking. Waiting. For what? Then Eleanor saw it. In the distance, on the road from town, more riders approaching. A lot of them. At least 20 horses moving fast. Reinforcements for the attackers? If so, they were finished. But as the new riders got closer, Eleanor recognized some of them. Jim Hawthorne, Sarah Mackenzie, Tom Brennan, Ben Foster, the ranchers from the meeting, armed and riding hard. The scarred man and his crew saw them coming too, saw the odds shift from 3-1 in their favor to 2-1 against, saw that this wasn't going to be an easy intimidation job anymore. They rode off into the night, leaving only hoof prints and bullet holes. The ranchers surrounded the house, dismounting, checking for injuries. Sarah Mackenzie ran up to the porch where Eleanor stood, still holding her smoking revolver. "We heard shots, came as fast as we could." Eleanor's knees went weak. She sat down hard on the porch steps, the adrenaline crash hitting her all at once. "How did you know?" "Tom's been watching the roads. Saw a large group riding toward your ranch, figured it wasn't social. We mobilized everyone we could." Jim Hawthorne looked at the bullet holes in the house walls, the shattered windows. "They're getting desperate. That's good and bad." "Mostly bad," Eleanor managed. "What they want." "Thomas Birch. He's here. He came back to testify, brought evidence with him. They wanted to silence him." Sarah's eyes widened. "Birch is here? The bookkeeper who sold you out?" "The same, but he's trying to make it right. The documents he brought, they're enough to prove Whitlock's running a criminal conspiracy. If we can get them to federal authorities, we win." "If you can get them there," Jim said, "Whitlock's going to throw everything he has at stopping you now. You're a threat. A real one." Eleanor looked at the assembled ranchers, tired, armed, determined. A community that had come together because they were all fighting the same enemy. And suddenly she understood something Mercer had been trying to tell her. They weren't going to win this alone. They were going to win it together. "We need to get this evidence to Helena," she said, "to the federal marshal. But it's too dangerous for one person to carry it. Whitlock will have people watching the roads." "So we all go," Sarah said. "All of us. Enough of us that they can't stop us without starting a war they're not ready for. That leaves the ranches unprotected, someone pointed out. We leave skeleton crews, women and older folks who can shoot if needed. The rest of us ride together. Sarah looked around at the group. This ends now, one way or another. We take the fight to them. Murmurs of agreement. Eleanor felt something swell in her chest. Not quite hope. Hope was too fragile. But possibility. The possibility that they might actually pull this off. Mercer's already in Helena, she said, meeting with Marshal Wade. If we can get there with this evidence, coordinate with him. Then we've got them, Jim finished. All right, we leave at first light. Bring provisions for 3 days, extra ammunition, anything valuable you can't leave behind. We travel as a group, stay armed, don't stop except to rest the horses. People nodded, started organizing. Eleanor went back inside to check on Birch. He was huddled in the spare room, pale and terrified. They tried to kill me, he said. They tried. We stopped them. Now you're going to Helena with us, and you're going to tell Marshal Wade everything. You understand? If I testify, I'll be arrested. What I did, feeding them information, that's conspiracy to commit fraud. Probably. But cooperation might get you a lighter sentence, and it's better than being dead. Birch nodded miserably. I know, I just wish I'd never started this. We all wish that. But we're here now, and we're finishing it. Eleanor left him there and went back to the office. The documents were still spread across the desk. Months of work, evidence that could destroy Whitlock's operation and free 17 ranching families from his grip. She gathered everything carefully, organized it into files, packed it all into multiple satchels in case they needed to scatter and run. Redundancy. Her father had taught her that too. Always have backup, always prepare for the worst. Outside, she could hear the ranchers organizing, horses being saddled, supplies being loaded, an army mobilizing. Not a professional army, just farmers and cattle ranchers who'd been pushed too far. But sometimes that was enough. Eleanor looked out the window at the darkness beyond the ranch house. Somewhere out there, Gideon Whitlock was probably getting reports about tonight's failed attack. Realizing his hired guns hadn't succeeded. Realizing that the isolated ranchers he'd been intimidating were now working together. Let him worry. Let him scramble. Let him understand that he'd miscalculated, that he'd targeted the wrong people, that his empire built on fraud and fear was about to crumble. Morning came cold and clear. Eleanor dressed in her warmest clothes, checked her revolver one more time, and went downstairs. The ranch hands who'd be staying behind looked grim but determined. Cole especially. You bring hell down on Whitlock, he said. For all of us. Plan to, Eleanor replied. The convoy assembled at dawn. 23 riders, armed and ready. Thomas Birch rode in the middle, guarded on all sides. Eleanor rode near the front, the evidence satchels secured to her saddle. Sarah Mackenzie pulled up beside her. You scared? Terrified. You? Same, but I'm also angrier than I've ever been. That helps. They rode out as the sun broke over the eastern ridge, painting the snow-covered landscape in shades of gold and pink. It would have been beautiful if Eleanor had any capacity left to appreciate beauty. But her mind was focused on the road ahead, the dangers that might wait, the possibility that they might not all make it to Helena alive. Behind them, the Mercer Ranch grew smaller. Eleanor didn't look back. Looking back was for people who had the luxury of nostalgia. She was looking forward, now, toward Helena, toward justice, toward the end of this nightmare, or toward death. Either way, she was done running. They made it 15 miles before the first ambush. The road narrowed through a rocky pass where pine trees crowded close on both sides, their branches heavy with snow. Perfect cover for anyone waiting. Eleanor saw the flash of movement half a second before the gunfire started. Enough time to shout a warning, but not enough to avoid it. The convoy scattered. Horses screamed and reared as bullets kicked up frozen dirt. Eleanor yanked her reins hard, sending her mount toward the tree line while fumbling for her revolver. Around her, the ranchers were doing the same, finding cover, returning fire, trying not to get killed in the first 30 seconds. Jim Hawthorne's horse went down, shot through the shoulder. Jim rolled clear and came up with his rifle, firing at shapes moving through the trees. Someone screamed. Eleanor couldn't tell if it was one of theirs or one of the attackers. How many? Sarah Mackenzie shouted from behind a boulder. Too many, Ben Foster answered, cranking off shots with methodical precision. Eleanor counted muzzle flashes. At least 8 shooters, maybe more, positioned in a semicircle that gave them overlapping fields of fire. They'd been waiting specifically for this convoy, which meant someone had talked or someone had been watching. Thomas Birch. He was still mounted, frozen in panic in the middle of the kill zone. Eleanor could see him shaking, unable to move, about to get shot to pieces. "Birch, get down!" she screamed. He didn't move, just sat there like a statue while bullets whipped past him. Eleanor cursed and spurred her horse forward. Stupid, reckless, probably going to get her killed, but she couldn't watch him die paralyzed by fear. She grabbed his coat as she passed and yanked hard enough to pull him from the saddle. They both hit the ground in a tangle of limbs, her shoulder slamming into frozen earth hard enough to knock the wind out of her. Bullets chewed up the ground where Birch had been sitting a second before. "Move!" Eleanor gasped, dragging him toward cover. "Move, damn you!" They made it behind a fallen tree just as a round splintered bark inches from her head. Eleanor shoved Birch down and raised her revolver, scanning for targets. There. A shooter repositioning behind a pine. She fired twice. Didn't know if she hit him, but he stopped moving. The fight lasted maybe 10 minutes, though time had that strange stretched quality where every second felt like an hour. The ranchers had better cover now, were shooting with the calm accuracy of people defending their homes. The attackers had numbers but not commitment. They were hired guns, not believers. When 2 of them went down and stayed down, the rest started pulling back. "They're running," someone shouted. "Let them," Jim called back. "Don't pursue. Check for wounded." Eleanor's ears rang in the sudden quiet. Her hands were shaking again, that post-fight crash hitting hard. She looked down at Birch, who was curled in a ball, hyperventilating. "You all right?" she asked. "I nearly died. We nearly died. They were shooting at us." "No kidding. Can you ride?" "I don't know. Maybe. I think so." Eleanor hauled him to his feet. Around them, people were emerging from cover, doing quick head counts. One man had taken a bullet through the thigh, painful but not fatal if they got him bandaged. 2 horses were dead. Jim Hawthorne's mount would need to be put down, the poor animal thrashing in agony. Jim did it himself, 1 clean shot. His jaw was set, eyes hard. That horse had carried him for 7 years. "We can't stay here," Sarah said, already helping the wounded man onto a spare horse. "They might regroup, come back with more." "We need to find a defensible position," Ben added, "somewhere we can hold if they try again." Eleanor pulled out the map Mercer had given her before he left. Traced the route to Helena with her finger. "There's a way station about 8 miles north. Used to be a trading post. Should have walls, maybe a well." "You sure it's still standing?" Jim asked. "No, but it's better than staying in the open." They rode hard, pushing the horses as fast as they dared on uncertain ground. Eleanor kept looking over her shoulder, expecting to see pursuers, but the land behind them stayed empty. Either the ambush party had given up or they were planning something worse. The way station appeared as the sun reached its peak, a cluster of weathered buildings surrounded by a half-collapsed wooden palisade. It had seen better days, but the main structure still had a roof, and the walls looked solid enough. They secured the horses in what remained of the stable and moved everyone into the main building. The wounded man, a rancher named Pete Larson, was laid out on a table while Sarah cleaned and bandaged his leg. The bullet had gone clean through, missing bone. Lucky. Eleanor spread her evidence satchels on a bench and did a quick inventory. Everything was still there. The documents had survived the ambush intact, which was more than she could say for her nerves. "We lost 2 horses and picked up a wounded man," Jim said, coming to stand beside her. "At this rate, we'll be lucky to reach Helena at all. We'll make it. We have to." "You always this optimistic?" "No, usually I'm terrified and trying not to show it." Jim smiled grimly. "That's honest, at least." He looked at the documents. "Is that really enough? Enough to bring down Whitlock's whole operation?" "It should be. Property fraud, bribery, conspiracy, witness intimidation. We've got names, dates, payment records. Birch's testimony ties it all together." Eleanor paused. "But only if we get it to someone who'll act on it. If Marshall Wade won't help, or if he's compromised, we'll have ridden into a trap for nothing. Mercer trusts him. Mercer trusted Thomas Birch, too." That landed heavy. Jim had no answer for it. They posted guards and tried to rest, but nobody slept well. The building was cold despite a fire in the hearth, and every sound outside made people reach for weapons. Eleanor dozed fitfully, dreaming of muzzle flashes and screaming horses and the look on Birch's face when he'd frozen in the saddle. She woke to Sarah shaking her shoulder. "Someone's coming. Single rider." Eleanor was on her feet with a revolver drawn before she was fully conscious. Outside, dawn was just breaking, painting everything in shades of gray. A lone horseman approached slowly, hands visible, not making any threatening moves. As he got closer, Eleanor felt her heart kick. She recognized that horse, that coat. "Hold fire!" she shouted. "It's Mercer!" He rode into the compound looking like hell, unshaven, exhausted, his coat stained with dried blood that Eleanor hoped wasn't his. But he was alive. He swung down from the saddle, and Eleanor met him halfway, not caring who saw, needing to know he was real. "You're supposed to be in Helena," she said. "Got there, talked to Wade, turned around and rode back when I heard about the convoy." His eyes scanned the group, counting heads. "What happened?" "Ambush, 15 miles south, 8 or 9 shooters. We drove them off but lost 2 horses and Pete took a bullet." Mercer's expression went dark. "How'd they know you were coming?" "That's the question. Either someone talked or they've been watching the ranches. Doesn't matter now. What matters is Wade's waiting in Helena with federal authority and a very short temper. He wants to see the evidence, hear testimonies, and if it's as solid as I told him, he's prepared to arrest Whitlock and his people tonight." Eleanor felt a surge of hope so fierce it was almost painful. "Tonight?" "Soon as we get there with proof, but it's got to be airtight. Wade's not risking his career on speculation." "It's airtight. Birch brought documentation showing the whole conspiracy. We've got survey fraud, forged deeds, bribery records, everything." Mercer looked past her to where Birch stood near the fire, trying to look small. "He came back?" "Yesterday, with evidence and a guilty conscience. The attack last night was probably meant to kill him before he could talk. Then we need to move. Fast. Wade can only hold off so long before word reaches Whitlock that federal marshals are asking questions." They prepared to ride within the hour. Pete Larson insisted he could stay on a horse despite his wound, stubborn pride overriding common sense. Sarah gave him enough whiskey to dull the pain and helped him mount up. The final stretch to Helena felt endless. They rode through mountain passes where the wind cut like knives, across frozen streams where the horses struggled for footing, past abandoned homesteads that spoke to how many people had already given up and left. Montana was beautiful and brutal in equal measure, and Eleanor was learning that survival here meant being harder than the land itself. They saw no more ambushes. Either Whitlock's people had fallen back to regroup, or they decided the convoy was too well armed to risk another direct assault. Eleanor didn't trust the quiet. It felt like the pause before thunder, like the world holding its breath. Helena appeared in the late afternoon, sprawled across the hillsides like a promise of civilization. Bigger than Black Hollow by an order of magnitude, with actual streets and buildings made of brick and stone. The territorial capital, where decisions got made and laws got written. Marshal Carson Wade's office was a sturdy building near the courthouse, marked with a federal seal that carried weight even this far from Washington. Wade himself was a tall man in his 50s with iron gray hair and eyes that had seen too much to be impressed easily. He looked up when Mercer walked in, and something like relief crossed his face. "Mercer, glad you made it back. These the people you told me about?" "Most of them. We had some trouble on the road. I heard. Got a report an hour ago about gunfire in the passes. Federal offense? Interfering with citizens traveling to meet with law enforcement." Wade's gaze swept across the group and settled on Eleanor. "You must be Miss Vane. Mercer spoke highly of your work." Eleanor stepped forward, setting the evidence satchels on Wade's desk. "Everything's documented. Property fraud spanning 15 years, at least 17 families affected. We can prove systematic bribery, forged documents, witness intimidation. And we have a cooperating witness who worked directly for the Western Montana Land and Development Company." Wade opened the first satchel and began sorting through papers. His expression remained neutral, but Eleanor could see his eyes sharpening as he read. A lawman who recognized real evidence when he saw it. "This Hayes Properties account," he said after a moment. "You can prove it's a front?" "The incorporation papers are forged. Different handwriting from other legitimate filings, no corresponding tax records, no actual business operations. And Thomas Birch can testify that Samuel Garrett used it to pay off informants." Wade looked up. "Birch is here?" Outside. Under guard. Bring him in. Thomas Birch looked like he wanted to bolt when he was brought into the office. He stood in front of Wade's desk with his hands shaking, unable to meet anyone's eyes. Wade studied him coldly. You worked for Whitlock's organization? Yes, sir. For about 8 months. They paid me to gather information from inside ranches, report on property records and vulnerabilities. And you did this knowing it would be used to defraud legitimate landowners. Yes. I knew. I needed the money. My mother was sick. I don't care about your mother, Wade cut him off. I care about your testimony. Can you identify the people who recruited you? Can you detail the payment structure? Can you name other clerks and bookkeepers working for the same operation? Birch swallowed hard. Yes, all of it. I kept records. Smart. Probably the only smart thing you've done. Wade turned to Eleanor. How solid is the documentary evidence? Will it hold up in federal court? I've cross-referenced everything against county records, territorial archives, and financial ledgers. The pattern is clear and consistent. Whitlock's company has been manufacturing title disputes for over a decade, targeting properties with known survey issues or missing documentation. They plant employees to gather intelligence, forge supporting documents, then use legal intimidation to force sales at reduced prices. Wade was quiet for a long moment, reading through more papers. Then he stood and walked to the window, looking out at the Helena streets. You understand what you're asking me to do? He said without turning around. Whitlock's got powerful friends, territorial politicians, federal appointees, railroad executives. Going after him means going after that entire network. I understand, Eleanor said. But if you don't, he'll keep doing this. More families destroyed, more land stolen. The law either means something or it doesn't. Wade turned back. His face was hard, but there was something like respect in his eyes. All right, here's how this works. I'm issuing arrest warrants for Gideon Whitlock and Samuel Garrett on charges of conspiracy to commit fraud. I'm also issuing warrants for the surveyor Carson and the clerk at the land office in Black Hollow, who we can prove accepted bribes. We move tonight before anyone can run or destroy evidence. Jim Hawthorne stepped forward. You'll need help. Whitlock keeps armed guards. I've got 6 deputy marshals. That should be enough. With respect, Marshal, you don't know how many men Whitlock can field. We came here ready to fight. Let us finish it. Wade looked at the assembled ranchers, tired, armed, determined. This isn't a vigilante action. We do this by the book. We're not asking to lynch anyone, Sarah said quietly. We're asking to stand witness when you make the arrests. So Whitlock knows he's not just facing federal authority, he's facing every person he tried to destroy. Wade considered this, then nodded slowly. All right, but you follow my lead. No shooting unless I give the order. This is a legal arrest, not a range war. Clear? Murmurs of agreement rippled through the group. Eleanor felt something loosen in her chest. It was happening. After weeks of gathering evidence, dodging attacks, fighting to survive, they were finally taking the fight directly to Whitlock. Win or lose, it ended tonight. Whitlock's mansion sat on a hill overlooking Helena, a sprawling stone edifice that screamed money and power. Lights blazed in the windows despite the late hour. Whitlock was home, probably drinking expensive whiskey and believing himself untouchable. The convoy approached after dark. Wade and his deputies in front, the ranchers following at a distance. They left the horses 100 yards out and approached on foot. Quiet, professional, everyone knowing their role. 2 guards stood at the front gate. Wade showed them his badge and arrest warrant. Federal Marshal, I need to speak with Gideon Whitlock. The guards exchanged uncertain looks. Mr. Whitlock doesn't see people without appointments. He'll see me. Open the gate, or I'll consider it obstruction of justice. The guards opened the gate. The front door was answered by a butler who tried to turn them away until Wade pushed past him into a marble-floored entrance hall that probably cost more than most ranches. Where is he? The study. But sir, you can't just... Wade was already moving, Eleanor and Mercer right behind him. The study doors were closed. Wade kicked them open. Gideon Whitlock sat behind a massive desk, a glass of brandy in his hand. He was younger than Eleanor expected, maybe 50, well-dressed, with the kind of face that looked good on campaign posters, confident, successful, used to getting his way. His confidence cracked when he saw Wade's badge. Marshal Wade, this is unexpected. Gideon Whitlock, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud, bribery of public officials, and witness intimidation. Put down the glass and stand up. Whitlock didn't move. On whose authority? Federal authority, and about 17 ranching families who are tired of your schemes. Wade pulled out the arrest warrant. We've got documentation, testimony, and enough evidence to put you away for 20 years. Now stand up. You're making a mistake. I have lawyers. I have friends in Washington who can visit you in prison. Stand up. Something dangerous flickered in Whitlock's eyes. His hand moved toward a desk drawer. Mercer's gun was out before Whitlock could finish the motion. Don't, Mercer said quietly. Whitlock froze. Looked at Mercer, then at Eleanor standing beside him, then at the crowd of ranchers filling the doorway. His expression shifted from confidence to calculation to something that might have been fear. You're that Pinkerton, he said to Mercer, the one causing trouble at the Mercer Ranch. Former Pinkerton, current owner of land you tried to steal. And you? Whitlock's gaze fixed on Eleanor. The woman from the train station. I remember the report. Marcus Hendry's mail-order bride who never went home. Eleanor felt cold fury settle over her. You used a dead man's name to lure me here. Thought you could plant me as a spy. Didn't work out how you planned, did it? You have no idea what you've interfered with. The railroad needs that land. Development needs that land. Progress built on fraud isn't progress, Wade interrupted. It's theft. Last chance, Whitlock. Stand up or I'll drag you out in chains. Whitlock stood slowly. Wade moved forward with handcuffs, and something in Whitlock snapped. He lunged, not for a weapon, just for the door, trying to run. Stupid and desperate. Mercer caught him, spun him around, and slammed him face first against the desk hard enough to rattle the brandy glass. Don't make this worse, Mercer said. Wade cuffed him. Read the charges in a clear, formal voice that echoed through the study. And Eleanor watched Gideon Whitlock, the man who'd terrorized ranchers, burned buildings, ordered attacks, destroyed families, get hauled out of his own mansion in handcuffs. It should have felt triumphant. It should have felt like victory. Instead, Eleanor just felt tired. They arrested Samuel Garrett the same night, pulling him from a hotel room where he'd been entertaining a woman who wasn't his wife. He tried to bargain immediately, offering to testify against Whitlock in exchange for leniency. Wade took his statement without making promises. The surveyor Carson was found at a tavern and came quietly, too drunk to put up a fight. The corrupt clerk from Black Hollow ran and made it 3 blocks before deputies caught him. By midnight, every major player in Whitlock's operation was in federal custody. Wade commandeered the Helena courthouse for processing. Eleanor spent hours walking through evidence with territorial prosecutors, explaining the documentation, connecting dots, building the narrative that would hold up in court. Her voice went hoarse. Her eyes burned. But she kept going because this was what mattered, making sure the case was airtight, making sure Whitlock and his people couldn't wriggle free on technicalities. Mercer found her around 2 a.m, slumped over a table covered in papers. You need to sleep, he said. I need to finish this. It's finished. Wade's got enough to convene a grand jury tomorrow. The prosecutors are satisfied. You did it, Eleanor. You built a case that's going to destroy an entire criminal enterprise. Eleanor looked up at him. We did it. All of us. No, this was you. I gathered some papers. The other ranchers showed up to help. But you're the one who saw the pattern, who connected everything, who turned scattered evidence into something that could stand up in federal court. You're the one who made this happen. She wanted to argue, wanted to deflect the credit to someone else, but she was too tired for false modesty. All right, I did it. We all did it. And now what? Now you rest. Tomorrow there'll be more work, depositions, grand jury testimony, coordinating with the other families. But tonight, you sleep. He helped her to a boarding house where Wade had arranged rooms for the convoy. Eleanor's room was small but clean, with an actual bed and quilts that didn't smell like smoke. She collapsed onto it fully clothed and was asleep before Mercer closed the door. She dreamed of Marcus Hendry's letters, dreamed of standing on that train platform with 11 cents, dreamed of the bunkhouse burning. But this time, instead of watching helplessly, she walked into the flames and came out carrying the evidence that would destroy the people who'd set the fire. When she woke, sunlight was streaming through the window and someone was knocking on the door. Eleanor opened it to find Sarah Mackenzie holding a tray with coffee and bread. Thought you might be hungry. Starving. Come in. They sat together while Eleanor ate, not talking much, just two women who'd survived something terrible and were trying to figure out what came next. The grand jury convenes at noon, Sarah said eventually. Wade wants us all there. Show of solidarity. Will they indict?
Wade seems confident. Says with Garrett testifying and all the documentation, it's a lock. Eleanor sipped her coffee. And after? What happens to the ranches? Wade's filing to have all of Whitlock's land claims dismissed. The territorial judge is reviewing the survey fraud evidence. If it goes the way it should, every property gets clear title returned. No more disputes. That's good. It is. But Eleanor, what about you? What happens to you after this is done?
Eleanor had been avoiding that question. The job at Mercer's ranch had been temporary, a desperate solution to being stranded with no options. But somewhere along the way, it had become something more. Not just employment, but purpose. Not just survival, but belonging. I don't know, she admitted. Go back to the ranch, I suppose. There's still work to do, organizing records, helping the other families get their documentation in order. And after that, I haven't thought that far ahead.
Sarah smiled. That's a lie. You think 6 steps ahead on everything, so what's the plan?
Eleanor looked out the window at Helena sprawling below. A territorial capital where decisions got made, where lawyers and clerks and bureaucrats handled the machinery of law and land and governance. She'd proven she was good at this work, better than good. She'd built a federal case from scattered pieces, coordinated testimony, organized evidence that prosecutors called some of the clearest documentation they'd ever seen. Maybe Philadelphia wasn't the only place where a woman with legal skills could matter. I think, she said slowly, I might stay in Montana, see if there's work for someone who understands land law and fraud investigation. Wade offered you a job, didn't he? Eleanor looked at Sarah in surprise. How'd you know? Because he'd be an idiot not to, and whatever else Wade is, he's not stupid. Sarah set down her coffee cup. You should take it. Montana needs people like you, people who can't be bought or scared off. It's not that simple. Why not? Because of Mercer, Eleanor thought but didn't say. Because somewhere between shooting lessons and evidence gathering and fighting off ambushes, something had shifted between them, something neither of them had acknowledged out loud, but both felt. And accepting Wade's job meant staying in Helena, meant leaving the ranch, meant choosing her career over whatever might develop with a stubborn former Pinkerton who'd saved her life about as many times as she'd saved his. Just isn't, she said finally. The grand jury proceedings were formal and efficient. Wade presented evidence. Eleanor testified about the documentary trail. Birch provided insider details about the conspiracy's operations. Garrett, trying to save himself, corroborated everything and named additional conspirators across 3 counties. The indictments came down before sunset. Gideon Whitlock, Samuel Garrett, the surveyor Carson, and 14 others charged with federal crimes carrying sentences of 10 to 20 years. Whitlock's lawyers filed immediate appeals, but Wade had built the case too well. The evidence was overwhelming. Eleanor stood in the courthouse hallway afterward, surrounded by ranchers who kept shaking her hand and thanking her. She smiled and accepted their gratitude, but inside she felt strangely hollow. Vindication should have felt better than this. Mercer found her outside on the courthouse steps, watching the sun set over Helena. Wade told me he offered you a position, he said. Deputy Marshal specializing in land fraud investigation. He did. You going to take it? Eleanor didn't answer right away. She watched the light fade over the mountains, thinking about everything that had brought her to this moment. The fake letters, the burned bunkhouse, the midnight rides and gunfights and desperate gambles, the evidence spread across tables, the satisfaction of watching Whitlock get arrested. I don't know, she said honestly. It's a good offer, important work, but the ranch still needs a bookkeeper, and there are 16 other families who'll need help organizing their records once the title disputes are dismissed. And she trailed off. Mercer leaned against the railing beside her. And? Eleanor turned to face him. And I'm not sure I want to be a deputy marshal. I'm sure I want to keep fighting fraud, but maybe not from inside federal bureaucracy. What are you saying? I'm saying maybe I start my own practice. Land law, title disputes, fraud investigation, work independently, take clients who need help, build cases against people like Whitlock. She paused. It'd mean staying in Montana, Probably basing out of Black Hollow since that's where most of the work would be. Something shifted in Mercer's expression. There's an empty office space above the general store in Black Hollow. Della Pritchard's been trying to rent it for years. Is that right?
It is. Good light, solid roof. Be a decent place for someone to set up a law practice. I'm not a lawyer. No, but you're better than most lawyers I've met, and you've got something they don't. What's that?
You give a damn. About the land, about the people trying to hold on to it, about doing things right instead of just doing them. Mercer turned to face her fully. Eleanor, you saved 17 families from losing everything. You built a case that destroyed a criminal empire. You rode through ambushes and gunfights and never backed down once. If you want to stay in Montana and keep doing that work, you'll have more clients than you can handle. And the ranch? Who handles your books? I'll figure it out. Or maybe I'll hire you as a consultant. A slight smile. At a very reasonable rate. Eleanor felt something warm unfold in her chest. Not quite happiness. Happiness felt too simple. But possibility. The possibility of building something here. Something that mattered. I'll think about it, she said. You do that. They stood together in comfortable silence while darkness settled over Helena. Below them, the town lit up with lamps and fires, people going about their evening routines, unaware that the machinery of justice had just destroyed a man who'd believed himself untouchable. Eleanor thought about the woman who'd stepped off the train in Black Hollow 6 weeks ago. Desperate, broke, humiliated. That woman felt like a stranger now. Or maybe not a stranger, just someone who'd been hiding under layers of fear and shame and exhaustion. Montana hadn't made her strong. It had just burned away everything that wasn't. Thank you, she said quietly. Mercer looked at her. For what? For hiring me when you had no reason to trust me. For teaching me to shoot. For fighting beside me. For... She gestured vaguely. All of it. Eleanor, you saved my ranch, my land, everything my father built. I should be thanking you. We're even then. Not even close, but we can call it square. They rode back to Black Hollow 2 days later with the entire convoy, moving slower now, less urgency, more exhaustion. The danger had passed. Whitlock was in federal custody. His operation was dismantled. The ranchers would get their land back with clear titles. It felt like waking from a nightmare. Black Hollow looked the same as when Eleanor had first arrived. Weathered buildings, frozen streets, people going about their survival. But it felt different now. Like home, maybe. Or at least like somewhere she belonged. She moved into the office above the general store within the week. It needed cleaning and furniture and a sign painted on the door, but it had good bones. Della gave her the first month rent-free, calling it payment for saving her brother's ranch from Whitlock's scheme. Eleanor set up a desk, organized her files, and put out word that she was available for land law consulting and title dispute resolution. The first client came within 2 days, the second within a week. By the end of the month, she had more work than she could handle alone. She hired Ruth Calloway as a clerk. The older woman knew the territorial records better than anyone and was happy to have work that mattered. Together, they helped ranchers across 3 counties organize documentation, file proper surveys, correct title errors that had persisted for decades. It wasn't glamorous work, but it was necessary. And Eleanor had learned that necessary was better than glamorous any day. Mercer came by the office sometimes, usually with an excuse about needing advice on some paperwork, but really just to check in. Eleanor appreciated it more than she'd admit. They'd been through something together that created a bond not easily broken, the kind forged in gunfire and shared purpose. One evening in late January, he showed up with a bottle of whiskey and news. Whitlock's trial date is set. March 15th. Federal prosecutors want you to testify. I figured they would. I'll be there. Mercer poured them both glasses. Wade also said the territorial governor is proposing new land fraud regulations. Stricter survey requirements, mandatory public posting of title transfers, criminal penalties for forged documents. They're calling it the Rancher Protection Act. Eleanor smiled. That'll make future Whitlocks think twice. Maybe. Or maybe they'll just get smarter about hiding it. He raised his glass. To fighting the good fight. Eleanor clinked her glass against his. To fighting it and winning. They drank, and the whiskey burned warm, and through the office window Eleanor could see Black Hollow settling into winter night. Smoke from chimneys, lamplight, and windows. The slow rhythm of frontier life continuing as it always had. She'd come here broken and desperate. Now she was neither. The scandal back in Philadelphia didn't matter anymore. The fake marriage scheme didn't matter. The burned bunkhouse, the attacks, the fear, all of it was just fuel that had carried her to this moment. "Eleanor," Mercer said, breaking the silence. "Can I ask you something?" "Always." "That first day when you walked up to the ranch with nothing but a carpetbag and attitude, did you ever imagine it would turn into this?"
Eleanor thought about it. "No, I thought I'd organize some papers, earn enough to leave, maybe head to California or back east. I didn't think I'd end up fighting a land war and taking down a criminal empire." "What changed?" "I got angry, and I stopped being afraid of what I'd lose because I'd already lost everything that mattered." She looked at him. "And I met people worth fighting for." Something passed between them then. Understanding, maybe, or recognition. They'd both been running from something when they ended up in Montana. Both had found purpose in the fight against Whitlock. Both had survived by refusing to back down. "You sticking around?" Mercer asked. "For now, maybe longer. This place grows on you." "It does," he smiled, "even when it's trying to kill you." Eleanor laughed, surprised by how good it felt. When was the last time she'd laughed? Not in Philadelphia, certainly. Maybe not in years. But here, in a freezing office in a nowhere Montana town, working harder than she'd ever worked for less money than she'd ever made, she felt something she hadn't felt since her father died. She felt necessary. She felt strong. She felt like herself. The whiskey bottle sat between them, and the night deepened, and somewhere in the territorial capital, a grand jury had just ensured that 17 families would keep their land, and one powerful man would lose everything. Justice wasn't always swift, but sometimes, when you fought hard enough and refused to quit, it came through. Eleanor Vane had learned that lesson the hard way, and she'd never forget it. Winter settled into the valley with the kind of cold that made you appreciate fire and coffee in equal measure. Eleanor's office above the general store became a fixture in Black Hollow, ranchers stopping by daily with documents that needed reviewing or titles that needed straightening. Ruth proved worth twice her salary, her memory for territorial records filling gaps that would have taken Eleanor months to research. The work wasn't glamorous. Most days involved sorting through decades-old paperwork, correcting survey errors, filing proper documentation with the territorial office. But it mattered. Every clear title meant a family could sleep without worrying someone would steal their land. Mercer stopped by when ranch work allowed, usually with some excuse about needing advice on contracts. They'd share coffee and talk about nothing important, weather, town gossip, whether the new surveyor hired by the county was competent or just good at looking busy. Eleanor looked forward to those visits more than she wanted to admit. The trial date loomed. March 15th. Federal prosecutors sent formal notification requesting her testimony, along with a letter praising her evidence compilation. Eleanor prepared methodically, reviewing documents, anticipating defense questions, rehearsing her explanations until Ruth threatened to throw something at her if she practiced one more time. The night before she left for Helena, Mercer appeared at her office with something wrapped in cloth. "What's this?" Eleanor asked. "Open it." A leather document case, finely crafted with brass fittings and her initials embossed on the front. "E.V. Mercer, this must have cost something you need. Can't show up at a federal trial carrying papers in a flour sack." He looked almost embarrassed. "Ruth helped me pick it out." Eleanor ran her fingers over the smooth leather. "Thank you. Just come back when it's done. Too many ranchers still need help for you to stay in Helena." "I wasn't planning to stay." "Good." They stood in the lamplight, something unspoken hanging between them. Eleanor wanted to say what these months had meant, how he'd given her more than employment, how fighting beside him had reminded her of her own strength. But the words felt too big. "I'll be back in a week," she said instead. "Try not to burn anything down." No promises. The trial opened in Helena's territorial courthouse on a cold March morning. The room packed with ranchers, reporters, lawyers. Whitlock sat at the defense table in an expensive suit, looking smaller than Eleanor remembered, less imposing,
just a man facing consequences he'd believed would never come. The prosecution built their case methodically. Samuel Garrett testified first, detailing the conspiracy's operations with clinical precision, how they identified vulnerable properties, manufactured disputes, bribed officials. His testimony was devastating because he didn't minimize his role, just laid it all out with receipts to back every claim. Thomas Birch followed, walking through his recruitment and betrayal. He looked miserable, voice shaking, but his testimony matched Garrett's perfectly. Then Eleanor's turn. She walked to the witness stand carrying her new document case, aware of every eye watching. The prosecutor led her through preliminary questions, then had her explain the evidence. Eleanor walked through the fake Hayes deed, forged in corporation papers, the pattern spanning multiple properties. She'd done this work for weeks, knew every detail, could recite dates from memory. The defense attorney approached for cross-examination with confident swagger. "Miss Vane, you claim expertise in land law, but you have no formal legal training, correct?" "I have no law degree, but 6 years' experience analyzing property documents and preparing legal briefs." "Working as what? A secretary?" "As a bookkeeper and legal researcher who just built the case that exposed your client's criminal enterprise, so I must be doing something right." Scattered laughter. The attorney's jaw tightened. He tried several angles, questioning her methodology, suggesting bias, implying she'd fabricated evidence. But Eleanor had anticipated every attack. She stayed calm, answered clearly, never took the bait. After an hour, he gave up. The jury looked increasingly sympathetic to the woman who'd exposed the fraud. The trial continued another week. More witnesses, more evidence, closing arguments that stretched across 2 days. Whitlock never took the stand. His lawyers knew better. The jury deliberated 4 hours. When they returned, the foreman read the verdict in a voice that carried through the packed courtroom. Guilty on all counts. The sound from the rancher's gallery was something between a cheer and a sob. People who'd spent years fighting Whitlock finally seeing justice delivered. Eleanor felt tears sting her eyes and didn't hide them. Beside her, Sarah was crying openly. Jim had his face in his hands. The judge sentenced Whitlock to 18 years in federal prison. Garrett got 12. The others received 5 to 15 years. Full restitution ordered. Every penny returned to victims. It was over. Outside the courthouse, Marshal Wade found Eleanor. "Hell of a job you did. Peterson said your testimony was the strongest expert witness statement he'd heard in 20 years. "I just told the truth." "You did more than that. Made the jury see exactly how Whitlock destroyed families for profit." Wade paused. "My offer still stands. Deputy marshal position, land fraud investigation." Eleanor looked out at Helena, the territorial capital where important work happened, laws got made. She could be part of that, but Black Hollow needed her more. "I appreciate it, Marshal, but I've got clients waiting, and Ruth would kill me if I left her alone." Wade smiled. "Figured you'd say that. But if you change your mind, the job's yours." The ride back to Black Hollow felt lighter. The weight of the trial lifted, Whitlock eliminated. The future suddenly open in ways it hadn't been since Eleanor stepped off that train 5 months ago. 5 months, it felt like years. They stopped at Tom Brennan's ranch to celebrate. Other ranchers arrived until the house was packed with people drinking, laughing, sharing stories about the fight they'd won together. Later, Eleanor stood outside in the cold, looking at stars so bright they seemed touchable. The door opened behind her. "Thought I'd find you out here," Mercer said. "Needed air." He leaned against the porch railing. "Ruth told me you turned down Wade's job offer." "News travels fast." "Small territory. Why'd you turn it down?" "Because being a federal marshal means traveling constantly. And I don't want to travel. I want to stay in one place, build something that lasts. Black Hollow's pretty small for big ambitions." "Maybe, but it's mine. My office, my practice, my choice. First time in my life, I'm exactly where I want to be, doing exactly what I want to do." Eleanor paused. "That's worth more than a federal badge." Mercer was quiet. "When you first showed up, I thought you'd last maybe a week. Too soft for Montana." "I almost ran that first night. Laid awake thinking about how to get money for a train ticket east." "What changed?" "You offered me work that mattered. Then Whitlock burned the bunkhouse, and I got angry. Turns out anger's a better motivator than fear." "It is, but it's not sustainable. Eventually you need something else." What do you have?
Purpose. The land. Building something my father started. He paused. And lately, partnership. Working with someone who understands the fight. Eleanor felt her heart kick up. Silas, what are we doing here? Having a conversation. You know what I mean? He turned to face her fully. I know, and I don't have a good answer. I'm not built for romance or pretty speeches, but I know you matter. Know I look forward to your visits more than I should. Know I sleep better when I know you're safe. That's not nothing. It's not enough either. You deserve someone who can give you more than gruff silences and bad coffee. Maybe I don't want more. Maybe I want exactly what you're offering. Honesty, partnership, someone who sees me as capable instead of damaged. You were never damaged, Eleanor, just in the wrong place with the wrong people. And now? Now you're exactly where you should be. Eleanor stepped closer. I'm staying in Black Hollow, building my practice, helping ranchers, making a life here. But that decision includes you. Includes the possibility of whatever this is becoming. Mercer smiled, the expression transforming his stern face. Good, because I wasn't planning to let you leave anyway. Wasn't planning to ask permission. He laughed, rare enough to be precious. No, you wouldn't. That's what I like about you. Spring came slowly, snow melting in grudging increments. Eleanor's practice grew. She hired a second clerk, handled increasing caseloads, land disputes, contract reviews, estate planning. Black Hollow was changing, new settlers arriving weekly, and Eleanor helped where she could. Reviewed claims, verified titles, made sure past mistakes didn't repeat. The Rancher Protection Act passed in April. Eleanor was invited to the signing ceremony but declined. She had work to do. Laws on paper meant nothing without enforcement, and enforcement started with proper documentation. Mercer's ranch prospered. Title disputes resolved, reputation solid. He expanded his herd and improved facilities. Eleanor helped with bookkeeping twice monthly, but increasingly those visits became personal rather than professional. Dinners that stretched into evenings. Conversations that wandered from business into everything else. One evening in late May, Eleanor sat on Mercer's porch watching sunset paint the valley gold and crimson. I got a letter from my brother today, she said. Mercer looked up from the saddle he was oiling. First one? First in 5 months. He heard about the trial, wanted to know if I was coming back to Philadelphia now that my Montana adventure was over. What'll you tell him? That I'm staying permanently, that I've built a practice and a life here, that I'm exactly where I belong. Think he'll understand? No, but I don't need him to. I understand, and that's enough. Mercer set aside the saddle and sat beside her. You've changed since that first day. Harder in some ways, softer in others. Montana does that. Burns away what can't survive, strengthens what remains. You were always strong. You just didn't know it. Eleanor leaned against his shoulder. I know it now. They sat in comfortable silence while the sun dropped toward the mountains. Eleanor thought about the woman who'd stepped off that train with 11 cents and broken dreams. That woman had believed she was a victim, that her life had been ruined by others' choices. She'd been wrong. Life hadn't ruined her. It had redirected her. The scandal, the fake marriage scheme, even the poverty that brought her west, all of it had been necessary to get her here. People talked about redemption like it was granted by others. Forgiveness bestowed, second chances given. But Eleanor had learned different. Redemption wasn't received, it was taken. You grabbed it with both hands and refused to let go, even when the world said you didn't deserve it. She'd deserved it. She'd always deserved it. I want to ask you something, Mercer said. Ask. Next spring, I'm planning to expand the ranch, buy adjacent property, run cattle across both spreads. Ambitious? Risky. He paused. I want you involved, not as a bookkeeper, as a partner. Equal stake, equal say, equal profit. Eleanor sat up, surprised. Silas? I know what I'm asking. You understand land law better than anyone. You're smart with money. You see angles I miss. And I trust you. Trust your judgment, your integrity. That's rare. Worth more than money or expertise. Partnership. Real partnership, based on mutual respect and shared vision. I'd need to maintain my practice, she said. I know. We'd hire a full-time bookkeeper. You'd handle strategy. And if we disagree? We argue until we find a solution, like we've been doing. Eleanor smiled.
That's worked so far. It has. So what do you say? She thought about it. Really thought. Partnership meant commitment, meant tying her future to his beyond personal affection. It meant trusting what they'd built would last. But hadn't she already made that choice by staying? Yes, I'll partner with you, on the ranch and everything else. Mercer's smile was slow but genuine. Good, because I was prepared to argue for 3 hours if you said no. Save your arguments for cattle breeding strategies. They shook hands formally, sealing the partnership. But this time the handshake lingered. This time Mercer pulled her close and kissed her, tentative at first, then deeper. It wasn't perfect or graceful. It was clumsy and uncertain, two people learning each other. But it was honest. And honest was better than perfect. About time, Eleanor said when they broke apart. Been thinking about that for months. Me too. We're idiots for waiting. But we got there. The sun had set, darkness settling over the valley. Above, stars emerged countless and bright. Somewhere in that vast Montana night, 17 ranching families slept secure, their land protected, their futures safe from fraud. Eleanor had done that. Not alone, but her work had been the catalyst. She'd arrived with nothing and built something that mattered. That was the lesson. Starting with nothing didn't mean staying with nothing. Being broken didn't mean staying broken. The wilderness didn't destroy you unless you let it. Montana had stripped away her illusions, her false sense of what life owed her, her belief that others' opinions defined her worth. What remained was someone Eleanor actually liked, someone strong and capable and unwilling to accept less than she deserved. Come on, Mercer said, standing and offering his hand. It's cold, and Ruth left dinner. Eleanor took his hand. Ruth's meddling again? She says it's about time we figured things out. She's not wrong. They went inside into warmth and lamplight and the smell of food prepared by someone who cared. Simple comforts Eleanor once took for granted and now treasured. The months ahead would bring challenges. Expanding the ranch meant risk. Building partnership, personal and professional, meant navigating disagreements and learning complete trust. Montana winters would still be brutal. But Eleanor had learned challenges weren't punishments. They were just the price of building something worth keeping. She paid that price willingly, paid it with hard work and careful planning and the knowledge that nothing good came easy. Eleanor Vane had arrived in Black Hollow as a woman everyone counted out. Scandal-tainted, broke, no prospects. She'd left that woman behind somewhere between the burned bunkhouse and the courthouse testimony. The woman who remained was someone Eleanor had spent 28 years becoming without realizing it. Strong enough to survive anything, smart enough to win impossible fights, brave enough to build a life on her own terms. Montana hadn't made her that person. It had just given her space to finally become who she'd always been, underneath the fear and shame and others' expectations. And that person, scarred, determined, honest to her core, was exactly who Eleanor Vane was meant to be. Outside, wind whispered through the valley. Inside, Eleanor sat down to dinner with her partner, her future, her choice. The lamplight was warm. The food was good. The conversation flowed easily. It was enough. More than enough. It was everything.